Elon Musk had just made a bold announcement, one that would echo across every corner of the globe. The news broke late one Tuesday afternoon. A groundbreaking technology project was underway that could change the way humans live forever. The headline screamed across every major news platform. Elon Musk unveils vision for humanity's future. The world as we know it is about to change. As millions tuned in to Musk's live-streamed press conference, it became clear that this wasn't just another electric vehicle announcement or Mars-bound mission. No, this time, Musk was talking about revolutionizing humanity itself, with technology that could seamlessly integrate artificial intelligence into everyday life, make electric cars the norm, and even create a sustainable human colony on Mars. His ambition was as vast as the universe he aimed to explore. But there was a catch, a startling fact that no one had seen coming. A recent survey, conducted by a well-known research firm, revealed a shocking statistic. 60% of people over the age of 50 did not believe in the future Musk envisioned. They didn't just question the feasibility of his ideas. They doubted that these technologies would ever be something they could live with, much less use. The very people who had lived through the major technological revolutions of the 20th century, from the moon landing to the rise of the personal computer, were now expressing fear, skepticism, and even outright resistance to the changes Musk promised. The data sent shockwaves through Musk's camp. How could someone as visionary as him, who had brought electric cars to the mainstream and changed the landscape of space travel, have such a large group of people in opposition? As the survey numbers went viral, the story took on a life of its own. The world watched as a generational divide began to emerge, with younger, tech-savvy individuals praising Musk's vision and the older generation recoiling in disbelief. Can the older generations adapt to the world Musk is creating, or are we headed for a future of division and mistrust? The media asked. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The debate grew hotter by the day, and for Musk, this new challenge was unlike anything he had faced before. This wasn't just about launching rockets to Mars or making electric vehicles more affordable. This was about changing the very fabric of society. And, to his surprise, many people, especially from older generations, were not only resistant, but outright fearful of what this new future meant for their way of life. It wasn't the kind of resistance Musk was used to. After all, he had spent his career defying expectations, whether it was with the creation of PayPal, the push for electric cars at Tesla, or the ambitious dreams of colonizing Mars. But this was different. This wasn't just about selling a product or changing a mode of transportation. This was about reshaping the future itself. And the stakes couldn't have been higher. In that moment, as Musk stood on stage at the press conference, he felt a sudden weight on his shoulders. This wasn't just a new challenge for him. It was a challenge for humanity as a whole. Could his generation, the ones who had grown up with computers and cell phones, really bring the world forward? Could the older generations, who had built the foundations of society in a vastly different era, ever embrace such monumental change? Musk looked out into the sea of cameras, social media feeds, and the growing skepticism. He knew this wouldn't be easy, but he wasn't ready to back down. This was his vision, and he believed it was the only way forward. But there was no denying it. The battle for the future was just beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon Musk didn't come from money. He didn't come from fame. His story was one of relentless ambition, a hunger to push beyond the boundaries of what others thought was possible. Born in Pretoria, South Africa, in 1971, Musk's childhood was anything but ordinary. As a young boy, he was a voracious reader, devouring books on subjects ranging from physics to science fiction, even before most kids could spell entrepreneur. He didn't fit the typical mold. He wasn't the most popular kid at school, nor did he excel in the traditional sense. But there was something about him, something that set him apart from the other kids. Musk had a vision, a sense of purpose that others couldn't see. By the time he was 12, he had taught himself to program and created his first computer game blaster. His prize? A modest $500. To most kids, that would have been the end of it. But to Elon Musk, it was just the beginning. At 17, Musk left South Africa and moved to Canada to attend Queen's University. His decision wasn't just about education, it was a stepping stone to the U.S., where he eventually transferred to the University of Pennsylvania and then on to Stanford for a PhD in applied physics. But just 2 days into his PhD program, Musk dropped out. He didn't need the degree. He had a dream, and it wasn't something a classroom could teach him. His first entrepreneurial endeavor was Zip2, a company he co-founded with his brother Kimball in 1996. The company provided online business directories and maps for newspapers. Musk's vision was clear. The internet was the future, and he wasn't going to let anyone tell him otherwise. In 1999, Compaq acquired Zip2 for nearly $300 million. Musk was just 27 years old, but he wasn't satisfied. Musk had bigger plans. In 1999, he founded X.com, an online payment company that would eventually become PayPal. While PayPal itself would revolutionize online payments, Musk's time with the company was brief. He was pushed out in a company restructuring. Despite the setback, PayPal went on to be sold to eBay for $1.5 billion in stock. Musk's share was $180 million. For most people, that kind of success would have been enough. But not for Musk. He wasn't interested in making money for the sake of it. He wanted to change the world. His next big move came in 2002 with the founding of SpaceX. Musk's ambition to colonize Mars was clear from the beginning. People laughed. They said it was impossible. At the time, private space travel was a joke. Yet, within a decade, SpaceX had launched the first privately funded spacecraft to reach orbit and later became the first to dock with the International Space Station. The impossible was starting to seem possible. In 2004, Musk joined Tesla Motors, an electric car startup founded by Martin Eberhard and Mark Tarpenning. Musk didn't invent the electric car, but he made it cool. Under his leadership, Tesla released the Roadster, an all-electric sports car that shattered preconceived notions about electric vehicles. The car wasn't just eco-friendly. It was fast, sleek, and powerful. The message was clear. Electric cars weren't just for hippies or tree huggers. They were for anyone who cared about the future of the planet. But despite his successes, Musk was not a stranger to hardship. Tesla was nearly bankrupt multiple times. SpaceX faced numerous rocket failures, and both companies teetered on the brink of collapse. Yet Musk persisted. His unwavering belief in his mission, to change the world for the better, drove him forward. Even when the odds seemed impossible, he pushed through, time and time again. What made Musk different was his ability to see what others couldn't. Where others saw roadblocks, Musk saw opportunities. He understood that failure wasn't the end. It was just another step in the journey. He believed that the future would be defined by those who dared to dream big, even when the rest of the world thought it was crazy. But this dream of Musk's, this vision of the future, was now under threat, not from other tech moguls or companies, but from something more deeply ingrained in society: fear of change. Despite his ambitious, larger-than-life persona, Musk was deeply affected by his relationships with those closest to him. His relationship with his father, Elon Musk, was strained and complicated. Elon was a successful engineer, but his troubled relationship with Elon shaped much of Musk's drive and ambition. The lack of emotional support from his father made Musk determined to prove himself, not only to his father but to the world. Musk's family life has also been eventful. He has been married 3 times, twice to actress Tallulah Riley, and has 6 children, including a son, Nevada, who tragically passed away at 10 weeks old. Musk's approach to fatherhood, like his approach to business, has been unconventional. He believes in setting high expectations for his children and pushing them to achieve greatness. While he often finds himself criticized for his demanding nature, he sees it as essential to fostering an environment where his children can achieve anything. His relationship with the public has also been complex. While many admire his innovative spirit and extraordinary achievements, there is an underlying skepticism about his persona. Musk's personal life, from his public feuds on Twitter to his blunt statements, has often overshadowed his work, leading some to question his true intentions. But those who know him best understand that behind the controversy, there is a man deeply committed to his mission of improving the world, even if that means facing criticism and opposition along the way. Yet, despite his successes and failures, Musk's belief in his vision for the future remained unwavering. It was this relentless drive that made him a polarizing figure, admired by millions but misunderstood by others. And as he looked out into the future, his vision for humanity's place in the cosmos was clearer than ever. A future where technology, space exploration, and sustainability define the next chapter of human history. But as the battle for the future loomed, Musk would face a challenge unlike any he had encountered before. An entire generation of people who were afraid of the very future he was trying to create. It didn't take long for the world to react to Musk's ambitious new vision for the future. As the news spread, the rift between the generations grew wider. Younger people, especially those in their 20s and 30s, seemed to embrace Musk's vision with open arms. They were already living in a world of rapid technological change, from social media to smartphones, from electric cars to artificial intelligence. To them, Musk wasn't just a billionaire. He was a trailblazer, a hero of the modern age. But the older generation, those who had built the foundations of the world we know today, saw things differently. To them, Musk's bold predictions felt unsettling. The speed at which technology was advancing was dizzying, and the thought of a future where AI made most decisions, where human workers were replaced by machines, and where even space travel became commonplace, left them feeling out of control. The fear was palpable. Talk shows, radio stations, and social media platforms buzzed with skeptical voices. Many older people were afraid of being left behind, of having their way of life become obsolete. Some felt as if they were being forced into a world they didn't understand and didn't ask for. They questioned the ethics of Musk's innovations. They feared that AI and automation would rob them of their jobs, or worse, strip away their dignity. Musk's critics in the older generations made their voices heard loud and clear. On one particularly heated episode of a popular news program, former presidential candidate and longtime politician Mark Davis argued, Elon Musk's so-called vision for the future isn't a vision, it's a nightmare. We're talking about a future where the elderly are discarded, where our jobs are taken by machines, and our children's future is determined by algorithms. This isn't progress. This is a future where we lose our humanity. The response from younger generations was swift and decisive. Social media erupted with hashtag #MuskIsTheFuture, trending worldwide. Influencers, tech enthusiasts, and young professionals jumped to Musk's defense. Musk's vision isn't about replacing humanity. It's about improving it, one popular tech influencer tweeted. Innovation has always been uncomfortable. Change is hard, but it's the only way forward. Yet despite the overwhelming support from younger people, the battle between these two worlds seemed to be growing more intense. The older generation, who had lived through the rise of the internet and witnessed the first moon landing, was now faced with something they couldn't fully comprehend. And the younger generation, who had grown up surrounded by technology, was frustrated by the stubborn resistance they encountered from their parents and grandparents. The conflict between these two groups was more than just ideological. It was cultural. For the older generation, their world had been built on stability, hard work, and gradual change. They had witnessed the rise of the industrial age, the growth of the internet, and the digital revolution. They had adapted to these changes, but the speed at which Musk's vision was being realized felt like a breakneck pace. For them, the future wasn't just a series of technological leaps. It was a world where values like community, family, and tradition still had a place. On the other hand, younger people saw the future as an exciting challenge, one where the boundaries of possibility could be pushed further than ever before. They were used to living in a world where information was at their fingertips, where technology wasn't just a tool but an extension of themselves. To them, Musk wasn't just changing the way people drove or the way they traveled to space. He was changing the very essence of human existence, making it more connected, more sustainable, and more efficient. But that efficiency came at a cost. Older generations were worried about their place in this new world, and they weren't alone in their fear. A growing number of workers, particularly in industries like manufacturing, retail, and transportation, were terrified of losing their jobs to automation. They feared that once AI and robots became commonplace, they would be left with nothing but obsolescence. "We've seen what happens when technology takes over," said Linda Rodriguez, a 63-year-old factory worker, during a televised debate. "First, it was the assembly lines that took our jobs. Then it was computers that made our work easier but also cheaper. Now, they want to replace us with robots? What's next? Will our entire generation be irrelevant? As the debates continued to heat up, Musk became more vocal. During an appearance on a popular talk show, he addressed the concerns head-on. "The future is not about replacing people," Musk said passionately. "It's about freeing people from mundane, dangerous jobs. It's about creating new opportunities." Think of it this way. Every major technological revolution has caused fear in the beginning. When we first introduced the automobile, people were terrified. The same thing happened when the telephone, computers, and the internet became mainstream. But with every revolution, society adapts. And this time, it will be no different. But Musk's words, though powerful, didn't reassure everyone. The older generation remained skeptical. They couldn't shake the feeling that something important, something human, was being lost in the rush toward progress. "I don't want to live in a world where I'm replaced by a machine," said Richard Simmons, a retired engineer in his late 70s. "I've worked my whole life, built my career. And now, these young tech whizzes are telling me I should just get out of the way?" And so, the divide continued to grow. With every technological breakthrough, Musk's critics became more entrenched in their position. Yet, in every corner of the world, people were embracing the new reality, young and old, some reluctantly, some eagerly. It was clear that the conflict was only going to intensify. The world was standing at a crossroads, and Musk was pushing forward with everything he had, determined to bring his vision to life. But the question lingered. Could the older generation find a way to adapt to this new future, or would they be left behind in the dust of progress? The world was on the edge of something big, but the biggest question of all remained. How would humanity react when it was faced with change at such an unprecedented pace? The debate raged on, dividing families, workplaces, and entire communities. The tension between the older and younger generations continued to build, but Elon Musk, ever the visionary, knew that the only way to move forward was to confront the challenges head-on. He had faced criticism before, but nothing like this. The magnitude of his vision, a future intertwined with artificial intelligence, electric cars, space travel, and a world where technology dictated every facet of life, was beginning to feel like a direct threat to the status quo. Now, Musk had to decide whether to continue pushing his vision forward, risking alienation, or adapt his approach to bridge the ever-widening gap between generations. The answer came in the form of a new project, something bigger and more ambitious than anything Musk had ever done before. It was late one afternoon when Musk took to social media to announce his latest initiative, a massive educational program aimed at training older workers for the future of automation and artificial intelligence. It was a bold move, one that Musk hoped would counteract the growing fear and skepticism among older generations. His goal was simple, to make sure that no one would be left behind. The program, dubbed the Future Skills Initiative, would provide free access to advanced technology courses, offering everything from AI and robotics training to coding and cybersecurity. Musk promised to partner with top universities, tech companies, and government agencies to ensure that workers of all ages, but especially those aged 50 and over, would have the tools and knowledge to succeed in an increasingly digital world. Musk's announcement was met with mixed reactions. For some, it felt like a lifeline. For others, it was a last-ditch effort to placate a generation too set in their ways to change. "Elon Musk is doing more than any politician to make sure we're not left behind," said David Foster, a 55-year-old mechanic who had spent the last 30 years fixing engines at a local auto shop. "The world is changing, and no one has a better chance at making sure we can still find our place in it than he does. I'm going to sign up for this program. It's better than being stuck in the past." But there were those who weren't so quick to buy into Musk's latest venture. It was clear that the conflict was only going to intensify. The world was standing at a crossroads, and Musk was pushing forward with everything he had, determined to bring his vision to life. But the question lingered. Could the older generation find a way to adapt to this new future, or would they be left behind in the dust of progress? The world was on the edge of something big, but the biggest question of all remained. How would humanity react when it was faced with change at such an unprecedented pace? The debate raged on, dividing families, workplaces, and entire communities. The tension between the older and younger generations continued to build, but Elon Musk, ever the visionary, knew that the only way to move forward was to confront the challenges head-on. He had faced criticism before, but nothing like this. The magnitude of his vision, a future intertwined with artificial intelligence, electric cars, space travel, and a world where technology dictated every facet of life, was beginning to feel like a direct threat to the status quo. Now, Musk had to decide whether to continue pushing his vision forward, risking alienation, or adapt his approach to bridge the ever-widening gap between generations. The answer came in the form of a new project, something bigger and more ambitious than anything Musk had ever done before. It was late one afternoon when Musk took to social media to announce his latest initiative, a massive educational program aimed at training older workers for the future of automation and artificial intelligence. It was a bold move, one that Musk hoped would counteract the growing fear and skepticism among older generations. His goal was simple: to make sure that no one would be left behind. The program, dubbed the Future Skills Initiative, would provide free access to advanced technology courses, offering everything from AI and robotics training to coding and cybersecurity. Musk promised to partner with top universities, tech companies, and government agencies to ensure that workers of all ages, but especially those aged 50 and over, would have the tools and knowledge to succeed in an increasingly digital world. Musk's announcement was met with mixed reactions. For some, it felt like a lifeline. For others, it was a last-ditch effort to placate a generation too set in their ways to change. Elon Musk is doing more than any politician to make sure we're not left behind, said David Foster, a 55-year-old mechanic who had spent the last 30 years fixing engines at a local auto shop. The world is changing, and no one has a better chance at making sure we can still find our place in it than he does. I'm going to sign up for this program. It's better than being stuck in the past. But there were those who weren't so quick to buy into Musk's latest venture. This is just another PR stunt, said Karen Thompson, a 62-year-old librarian and vocal critic of Musk's vision for the future. He's not interested in saving us. He's interested in making sure his AI-powered factories have enough workers to run them. It's just another way for him to profit off of us. The mixed reactions were a sign of how deeply divided the world had become. Musk's new initiative could very well be the turning point, a chance to bring people from all walks of life into the future, or a desperate attempt to silence his critics. The question, however, was whether the older generation would even take the offer seriously. A few months later, the first batch of students enrolled in the Future Skills Initiative began their courses. The scene was unlike anything Musk had anticipated. In one room, a former teacher in her 60s was learning how to code. In another, a retired factory worker was being introduced to the basics of AI. Musk himself visited a few of the classes in person, observing the transformation taking place before his eyes. "I never thought I'd be sitting in a classroom again, especially not learning how to program a robot," said James Carter, a 59-year-old former truck driver who had spent most of his life behind the wheel. He had enrolled in the program to learn new skills, knowing that the future of work would require him to adapt or risk becoming obsolete. As he sat at a computer, learning the basics of robotics, James felt something he hadn't in years: hope. "I'm not just going to let technology pass me by," he said. "If I can figure out how to build a robot, I can figure out how to make it work for me." The program was a success in many ways, but the real challenge was still ahead. Could Musk inspire enough of the older generation to overcome their fear and truly embrace the new world he was creating? While many participants in the program began to embrace the new skills they were learning, there was still a significant portion of the older generation that remained resistant. For them, the pace of change was too rapid. They longed for a slower, more predictable world, a world where hard work and experience mattered more than new technologies. The fear of obsolescence loomed large, and the idea of being replaced by machines or AI was too much to bear. In fact, a growing number of protests were taking place across the country, with older workers demanding that their voices be heard. "We've earned our place in this world, and we won't just roll over for technology," said Sylvia Gomez, a former factory supervisor who had seen her job replaced by an automated system. "I want to work, but not on Elon Musk's terms. Not in a world where robots do everything for us." These protests were a stark reminder of the challenges Musk still faced in convincing older generations that his vision for the future was one they could live with. It wasn't just about creating jobs or training workers for new industries. It was about changing the fundamental way people thought about work, technology, and their place in the world. For the first time in years, Musk found himself questioning his approach. The protests, the skepticism, the outright rejection from so many people, it was starting to wear on him. Was he pushing too hard? Had he miscalculated the resistance to change? Was the world really ready for the future he envisioned? Or was he simply out of touch with the reality many people were facing? One evening, after a particularly tough round of interviews with the media, Musk sat alone in his office at SpaceX, staring out the window at the sprawling city lights. He thought about his own children, his own family. He thought about his father, who had never believed in him. And he wondered, was he making a difference, or was he simply creating a future where the old world would be left behind? But in that moment of doubt, something sparked inside him. He remembered why he started all of this in the first place: to push humanity forward, to make the world better for his children, for the planet, for everyone. The future wasn't perfect, but it was worth fighting for. And so, Musk made a decision. He wouldn't back down. He would keep pushing, keep innovating, and he would find a way to bridge the divide, no matter what it took. It was supposed to be a breakthrough. The Future Skills Initiative had garnered more attention than any of Musk's previous projects. With thousands of older adults now enrolled in his free tech courses, it seemed as though the divide between generations was starting to narrow. Musk had built something that felt like hope, a tangible bridge between the present and the future. But even as the program flourished, something unexpected happened that would change everything. It started as a small news blip. A report surfaced of an incident at one of Musk's automated Tesla factories, where an AI-powered system malfunctioned, causing a serious accident. The details were scarce at first, but the media quickly picked up on the story, and soon, it spiraled out of control. The headline read, "Elon Musk's automation revolution turns deadly. AI malfunction causes accident in Tesla factory." At first, Musk dismissed it as a minor issue. Every technology had growing pains, and AI was no different. But the story quickly morphed into something much bigger. The public began to question the ethics of Musk's vision. Was he putting profits ahead of people? Were these cutting-edge technologies, the very ones he championed, too risky for the real world? Then came the real blow, a lawsuit. A group of workers who had been affected by the Tesla factory malfunction filed a class action lawsuit, accusing Musk and his companies of negligence. The case quickly gained traction, with protesters rallying outside SpaceX and Tesla headquarters, demanding accountability. But it wasn't just about the lawsuit. The real heart of the matter was the growing fear that automation and AI were becoming too powerful, too fast, and that Musk, in his haste to lead humanity into the future, had ignored the costs. For Musk, the lawsuit wasn't just a legal challenge. It was an emotional crisis. As someone who had devoted his entire career to pushing the boundaries of technology, he had never imagined that his ambition could lead to such consequences. Yes, he had always understood that progress came with risks, but this wasn't the kind of risk he had anticipated. Lives were at stake, and the failure of his beloved machines had resulted in real, tangible harm. In private, Musk wrestled with guilt. He thought back to the workers he had promised would benefit from automation, the very people now accusing him of abandoning them. He had always envisioned a world where technology would improve the quality of life for everyone, but now it felt like his dream was crashing down. He wasn't just the head of a corporation. He was a father, a son, a human being who cared deeply about making the world a better place. And this wasn't the future he had dreamed of. Musk had faced challenges before, but this felt different. The conflict wasn't just a technical issue or a business setback. It was a moral one. His reputation was on the line. The critics who had always doubted him now seemed vindicated. His words about changing the world felt hollow when a tragedy like this could happen under his watch. His closest advisors were divided. Some suggested he take a step back, apologize, and focus on damage control. Others encouraged him to continue forward, maintaining that setbacks were part of any revolutionary journey. But Musk couldn't shake the haunting question. Had he pushed too hard? One evening, sitting in the quiet of his office at SpaceX, Musk found himself staring at a photo of his children. His 6 kids, ranging in age from a toddler to young adults, had always been his inspiration. He had always imagined a world where they could look back and be proud of their father's work. Now, he wondered, would they see him as a hero, or would they see him as a man who caused harm in the pursuit of progress? It was a thought that gnawed him through sleepless nights. He remembered the moment he first held his son X-12, the deep, unshakable love that made him promise that he would do everything in his power to build a better world. But now, that promise seemed far away, obscured by the mounting crisis. And then, in an unprecedented move, Musk did something no one expected. He took to Twitter, not to defend himself, but to apologize. The tweet came late one night, but its message was clear. "I deeply regret the incident at the Tesla factory. I've always believed that technology should make life better, not worse. This accident is a painful reminder of how important it is to ensure the safety and well-being of every worker and person who interacts with our technology. I will take full responsibility and do whatever it takes to make this right. I promise you, we will learn from this and build a safer, more ethical future." The reaction was mixed. Some praised Musk for his honesty, acknowledging that this was a rare moment of vulnerability for a man who often seemed impervious to criticism. Others, however, questioned the sincerity of his apology, accusing him of trying to cover up the bigger issues with a few carefully chosen words. Yet, Musk's admission did something important. It shifted the conversation. Instead of simply seeing him as the embodiment of unchecked ambition, people began to see a man grappling with the complexities of progress. It was clear that Musk wasn't perfect, and neither was his vision. But it was also clear that he was willing to face the consequences of his actions and learn from his mistakes. The days following Musk's public apology were marked by intense scrutiny, but also a growing sense of support from an unlikely place, the older generation. While they had always been skeptical of Musk's vision, many now saw him as a man trying to make amends, trying to navigate the fine line between progress and ethics. For the first time, Musk's mission seemed more human than robotic. And in that humanity, a new opportunity arose. A chance to truly bring people together, regardless of age or background. Musk's critics didn't disappear overnight, but the dialogue shifted. He now had to prove that his vision for the future could be both transformative and responsible. It wouldn't be enough to simply build electric cars and send rockets to Mars. The future Musk envisioned had to be one where technology and humanity coexisted harmoniously, where innovation didn't just serve the few, but the many. The Future Skills Initiative gained renewed attention. Older adults, once wary of Musk's world, now saw the program as more than just a chance to learn new skills. It became a symbol of a future that, despite its challenges, could still include them. Musk's resolve was tested, but in the face of adversity, he had discovered something essential. The future wasn't just about technology. It was about people, and ensuring that no one was left behind. The weeks following Elon Musk's public apology were a whirlwind of media attention, intense scrutiny, and, unexpectedly, moments of reflection. For Musk, it was both a humbling and invigorating period. While the accident at the Tesla factory and the subsequent lawsuit had shaken him to his core, the aftermath had sparked something new. A realization that perhaps the path forward wasn't just about forging ahead at breakneck speed. It was about ensuring that the future he envisioned was built on a foundation of responsibility, transparency, and, most importantly, humanity. The world had watched him fall, and now they were watching to see if he could rise again. Musk's first major move after his apology was to reassess the future of automation and AI in his companies. The Future Skills Initiative, which had initially been a bridge to help older generations adapt, suddenly became something far more profound. It was no longer just about teaching people new skills. It was about building a new kind of relationship between technology and the people who would work with it. In a groundbreaking announcement, Musk shared that Tesla, SpaceX, and Neuralink would begin investing heavily in AI ethics and worker safety. The announcement came in the form of a live-streamed press conference, broadcasted to millions of viewers worldwide. "We cannot afford to build a future where people are left behind, where technology does not serve humanity," Musk stated. "That means ensuring our automation doesn't compromise safety, ethics, or human dignity. "We are committed to creating a world where technology empowers people, not replaces them." The speech, while short, was powerful. The focus on ethics and worker safety, topics Musk had rarely discussed in depth before, resonated with many of his critics. It was clear that Musk was now acknowledging the complexities of his vision, that in the rush to build a better world, the human cost must never be overlooked. While Musk's words were important, they were only the beginning. The real challenge lay in translating this new philosophy into action. Over the next several months, Tesla, SpaceX, and Neuralink implemented sweeping changes within their organizations. 1. AI safety standards. Tesla's automated systems were re-evaluated, with an emphasis on ensuring that AI operated with a level of transparency that allowed for human oversight. The company worked with top experts in AI ethics to create new safety protocols, and a new AI oversight committee was formed, including ethicists, engineers, and workers from various fields. 2. Worker retraining programs. The Future Skills Initiative expanded beyond just the tech courses. Tesla and SpaceX partnered with major universities and trade schools to provide paid retraining for workers in non-tech roles, including factory jobs and truck driving. The program wasn't just for tech enthusiasts. It was designed to integrate all workers into the new world, regardless of their past job or level of expertise. 3. Community outreach. Musk's companies began engaging more directly with local communities. Town hall meetings, where workers could voice their concerns, were held regularly. These meetings weren't just about technology. They were about listening, understanding, and finding ways to create a mutually beneficial relationship between workers and the companies they worked for. The changes were met with mixed reactions. While many praised Musk for taking responsibility and steering his companies toward a more ethical future, others remained skeptical. Some critics wondered if these moves were simply a way to repair his image, while others questioned whether Musk could sustain this new approach in the long term. Despite the controversy, one thing became clear: Musk was not alone in his efforts. Across the country, older workers began to notice a shift in how technology was being integrated into their lives. What had once seemed like an inevitable threat to their livelihoods was now being framed as an opportunity for partnership. Take James Carter, the 59-year-old mechanic who had enrolled in the Future Skills Initiative. After learning the basics of robotics and AI, he had returned to work at Tesla. However, he wasn't just a mechanic anymore. He was a collaborator, working with engineers to ensure that the automated systems in the factory were safe and functional. "I've never felt more important," James said, his voice filled with pride. "I'm part of the team that makes sure these robots don't make the same mistakes. I can't replace them, but I can make sure they work for all of us." For many older workers like James, Musk's new focus on retraining and inclusion had breathed new life into their careers. The opportunity to contribute to the future, rather than being discarded by it, gave them a sense of purpose that had long been missing. But the real breakthrough came when Musk realized that his vision was no longer about simply bridging a gap between generations. It was about creating a shared vision for the future, one where technology and humanity could evolve together. For Musk, this was the turning point, a moment when the personal and professional worlds converged. In a rare moment of solitude, Musk sat in his office late at night, staring out at the stars. He thought about the journey that had led him to this point, the countless obstacles, the failures, the triumphs, and the profound moments of doubt. He had built incredible companies and pushed the boundaries of space travel, but this moment, right here, was different. It wasn't about creating a new product or revolutionizing an industry. It was about creating a future that worked for everyone. He thought about his children again, the legacy he was leaving behind. Would they look at his work and see a man who had made the world better for them? Would they see someone who understood the importance of not just dreaming big, but also taking responsibility for the impact those dreams had on others? Musk smiled faintly, a quiet determination settling over him. The future wasn't going to be easy. It never had been. But now, he felt certain of one thing. It was worth fighting for. As the months went by, the world began to see a change in Musk. His companies flourished, but the focus had shifted. It was no longer just about revolutionizing industries or exploring space. It was about creating a future that was sustainable, ethical, and inclusive. Musk's ambition remained, but now it was tempered by a deeper understanding of the human side of progress. The Future Skills Initiative continued to expand, reaching more people, more communities. Musk's commitment to worker retraining, AI safety, and ethical technology became a core part of his mission. And slowly but surely, the gap between the older and younger generations began to close, as both sides realized that the future wasn't a matter of competition, but of collaboration. And in the end, perhaps that was the most important lesson of all. It had been over a year since Elon Musk's public apology, and the changes he had promised were beginning to take root. Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, and the Boring Company were all shifting gears, moving from a model of rapid innovation to one that balanced ambition with a deepened sense of responsibility. Though many of Musk's critics remained skeptical, the impact of his new approach was undeniable. On the streets, in the factories, and in the classrooms of his retraining programs, something remarkable was happening. The bridge Musk had tried to build between the older and younger generations was no longer just a theoretical concept, it was tangible, and it was changing lives. Tesla's flagship factory in Fremont, California, once a symbol of cutting-edge automation, now also represented a new approach to human-AI collaboration. The plant's newly integrated system wasn't just designed to increase efficiency. It was designed to protect the workers who helped make it function. As part of the overhaul, Tesla had introduced a worker safety initiative that utilized real-time monitoring systems to ensure worker safety at every stage of the production process. Instead of replacing workers with robots, Tesla had found ways to make the workforce safer and more productive by leveraging automation in a way that enhanced human capabilities. James Carter, the 59-year-old former mechanic who had become one of the program's poster children, now oversaw a team of technicians. His job was not only to help maintain the machines, but to ensure that the robots were working harmoniously with the humans around them. Carter had become something of a mentor in the factory, a symbol of how it was possible for older workers to embrace new technologies and thrive. "I used to think I was done," James said one afternoon, as he walked through the factory floor with Musk, giving him a tour. "But now I know this is my place. This tech is here to stay, and I'm going to make sure it works for us, not against us." Musk nodded, a quiet sense of pride in his eyes. "This is what I've always dreamed of, a future where technology doesn't just replace people. It works with them." The changes at Tesla weren't just technical, they were cultural. The company's management now placed greater emphasis on listening to its workers, especially those who had been in the trenches for years. In every department, employees were encouraged to share their ideas on improving processes, whether it was about making machines safer or finding better ways to integrate AI into existing workflows. But the change wasn't only happening on the factory floor. The next generation of engineers and scientists was coming of age, and they had Musk's human-first approach to technology embedded in their minds. At one of the top universities Musk had partnered with, a new program had been developed specifically for students studying artificial intelligence. Called Tech for Humanity, it focused not only on the mechanics of AI, robotics, and automation, but on their ethical implications. Students were taught that technology should never come at the cost of human dignity, and they were encouraged to think critically about how their innovations would affect people on the ground level. Samantha Lee, a 24-year-old graduate of the program, was one of the first to land a job at Neuralink. Her thesis, which focused on the ethical concerns of AI-assisted brain implants, had impressed Musk himself. "The idea of building something for humanity is so much bigger than just making money," Samantha said, as she sat in her office at Neuralink. "When I heard about the changes Musk made after the accident, it really clicked for me. We can't just keep pushing boundaries without thinking about who gets hurt along the way. We have to consider the human element, or we risk everything." For Samantha and other young engineers like her, Musk had become a different kind of role model. Instead of simply admiring his entrepreneurial success, they respected his willingness to evolve, to acknowledge mistakes, and shift his philosophy for the better. Public perception of Elon Musk had also undergone a dramatic transformation. In the early days of his career, he had been seen as an eccentric genius, a man whose relentless drive sometimes seemed out of touch with reality. He was the man who believed that humanity could live on Mars and that electric cars would rule the world. But after the factory incident and the subsequent changes in his companies, Musk was no longer just an inventor or a businessman. He had become a thought leader. The media that had once mocked his boldest ideas now celebrated his willingness to rethink, adapt, and grow. Musk's social media presence, while still polarizing, now carried a different tone. Instead of boasting about his latest innovations, he often shared insights on ethics, responsibility, and the future of humanity. The truth is, technology is neutral, Musk tweeted one night. It's how we choose to use it that determines if it will uplift or harm. It's our responsibility to make sure that no one is left behind, especially as we move forward into an uncertain future. Musk's words struck a chord with many of his followers. For the first time in years, people began to see him as a human being, a man who cared about the implications of his actions and understood the weight of his influence. The era of unchecked ambition was over. The new Musk was a man driven not just by technological progress, but by a desire to shape a world where technology could serve humanity in the most inclusive way possible. Musk's changes reverberated beyond the borders of the United States. In Europe and Asia, his initiatives were studied, with governments and businesses alike looking at Musk's example of balancing technological innovation with a focus on societal welfare. In Germany, for example, BMW had partnered with local unions to create a similar retraining program for workers whose jobs were at risk of automation. The program included advanced courses in AI and robotics, and workers who were displaced by automation were given access to reskilling opportunities. In Japan, where automation was already heavily integrated into industries like manufacturing, Musk's push for worker-first policies found resonance. Companies began rethinking their strategies for integrating robots and AI into their workforces, placing greater emphasis on human oversight and safety. Musk's philosophy of responsible innovation had sparked the beginning of a new economic model, one where companies were expected to prioritize long-term social good as much as profit. Businesses were starting to realize that their success didn't have to come at the expense of their workers. In fact, many were learning that by investing in their employees' futures, by giving them the tools to adapt to changing industries, they could build a stronger, more sustainable workforce. The Future Skills Initiative continued to grow, expanding to countries all over the world. The focus of the initiative wasn't just on AI or coding. It was about giving people the tools to thrive in an ever-changing world. From agriculture to healthcare to energy and transportation, workers were being trained not just for new jobs, but for a new way of thinking. As Musk looked back at how far he'd come, he felt a deep sense of accomplishment. His companies were thriving. The future was more uncertain than ever, but now, more than ever, Musk was confident that it could be a future where technology and humanity evolve together. In a private moment, standing on the rooftop of SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, Musk reflected on the journey he had taken. From the early days of Tesla, when he was an outsider, to the highs of sending rockets to space, and the lows of facing public backlash after the factory incident, Musk had learned one of the most important lessons of his life. Innovation without compassion is hollow. Technology without ethics is dangerous. And no future, no matter how advanced, can succeed if it leaves people behind. He took a deep breath, the California air warm and familiar. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, it felt within reach. A future where the dream of technological progress was no longer just about advancing machines, but about advancing humanity. Elon Musk had always dreamed big. He'd aimed to colonize Mars, revolutionize transportation with electric vehicles, and create a future where artificial intelligence worked hand in hand with humanity. But now, in the wake of his transformation from tech mogul to global thought leader, Musk's vision had expanded further. The world was beginning to see the practical impact of his ideas. The shift in his companies, from rapid innovation to sustainable, ethical growth, was beginning to influence not just his employees, but the global marketplace, governments, and citizens alike. In boardrooms across the world, leaders began to ask themselves a question that had never been posed with such urgency. Can we adapt to a future shaped by technology, and more importantly, can we ensure that this future is one where no one is left behind? The Future Skills Initiative had been a bold and unexpected move. Musk, known for his single-minded focus on the future, had shifted his efforts to something much more foundational: people. The retraining programs and AI safety initiatives that had started in Musk's companies were now being adopted by governments and corporations worldwide. In Europe, countries like Germany and France began to model their own versions of the initiative. Germany, with its robust manufacturing sector, saw the most dramatic impact. The government collaborated with automakers like BMW, Volkswagen, and Audi to establish retraining programs for workers whose jobs were threatened by automation. These programs were designed not only to teach new technical skills, but also to help workers develop a deeper understanding of the ethical concerns surrounding AI and robotics. In Japan, where automation had been integrated into almost every industry, Musk's model for responsible AI adoption resonated deeply. The country's government began a nationwide dialogue on how to incorporate Musk's principles of human-AI collaboration into their own policies. This led to a new series of regulations and guidelines ensuring that automation would be used to enhance workers' roles, rather than replace them. Meanwhile, in emerging economies across Africa and Southeast Asia, the conversation around the future of work had shifted. Musk's commitment to retraining had become a beacon of hope for workers in countries where automation was seen as a looming threat to job security. Governments in Kenya, Nigeria, India, and Indonesia looked to replicate Musk's Future Skills initiative, ensuring that people in lower-income regions had access to the tools they needed to thrive in an increasingly automated world. One of the most significant changes Musk had set into motion was the rise of global collaboration. For years, the world's technological giants had been caught in a race to outpace each other, with little regard for the broader implications of their innovations. However, as Musk's ideas spread, a new sense of cooperation began to emerge, born from the shared realization that the future of humanity wasn't a competition. It was a collective responsibility. In Silicon Valley, a coalition of tech companies came together to form a new global tech ethics consortium. Tesla, SpaceX, and Neuralink were founding members, but the group also included other influential companies like Google, Microsoft, and Apple. The consortium's mission was to develop a universal framework for the ethical use of AI and automation, focusing not only on innovation but also on inclusive progress. The impact of this collaboration was seen most clearly in the field of AI development. Rather than pursuing AI dominance at any cost, the companies in the consortium worked together to ensure that their technologies would benefit humanity as a whole. The focus shifted from simply achieving technological superiority to ensuring that AI was used to amplify human potential, rather than replace it. As Musk's influence spread, a new economic model began to take shape, one in which companies were expected to act as stewards of society, not just as profit-driven entities. This shift was most evident in the Corporate Responsibility Index, CRI, a new global ranking system that measured companies based on their impact on both the economy and society. Rather than relying solely on financial profits, the CRI evaluated companies on factors like employee welfare, environmental impact, and their role in addressing social inequality. Tesla, SpaceX, and Neuralink consistently ranked high on the CRI, thanks in part to Musk's public commitment to ethical innovation and responsible growth. For the first time in history, businesses were being judged not just by their bottom line, but by their ability to create positive change in the world. Even as Musk's companies were reshaping the global economy, his mind was never far from the stars. SpaceX, which had been on the brink of a breakthrough moment, was moving forward with its mission to establish a colony on Mars. The SpaceX Starship, which had been a glimmering vision just a few years earlier, was now in the final stages of its testing phase. But this time, the mission to Mars wasn't just about reaching a new frontier. It was about creating a new type of society, one that embodied the principles Musk had spent years promoting. As SpaceX prepared for its first crewed mission to the Red Planet, Musk envisioned a Mars colony where technology and humanity would coexist in perfect harmony, built on the lessons learned from Earth's evolving relationship with AI and automation. He was adamant that the colony would be governed by a new set of principles that prioritize collaboration, ethical decision-making, and collective welfare. The Martian society, he believed, could serve as a model for Earth, where humans had learned from their mistakes and built a more inclusive and sustainable future. Musk's transformation from a billionaire inventor to a global champion of ethical innovation was perhaps best reflected in public opinion. No longer the eccentric, controversial figure who seemed obsessed with changing the world through sheer willpower, Musk had evolved into a thoughtful leader who understood the complexities of the challenges ahead. People who had once dismissed Musk's ambitions as too idealistic were now beginning to see the long-term value of his vision. Former critics in the media and technology sectors began to express admiration for his willingness to take risks, confront failures head-on, and, most importantly, to listen. "I used to think Musk was all talk," said a former journalist who had covered him extensively in the past. "But he's proven that he's not just in this for the glory or the money. He's serious about making the world a better place, even if it means acknowledging his mistakes and evolving." For Musk, this shift in public perception was both gratifying and humbling. It was proof that true leadership wasn't about having all the answers, but about learning, adapting, and guiding others toward a better future. His companies were not just changing the world technologically, they were becoming beacons of hope for a future where innovation and humanity could thrive together. As Musk reflected on the global impact of his ideas, he couldn't help but think about the future, about the young people who had come of age during this transformative period. They were the first generation to grow up in a world where ethical innovation wasn't a buzzword, but a guiding principle. They were the ones who would carry his vision forward, not just on Earth, but in space. One of those young people was Ava Williams, a 28-year-old scientist who had been with Neuralink since its early days. Ava had been part of the team working on the development of the brain-computer interface that Musk believed could revolutionize healthcare. Her work had already shown promise in restoring sight to the blind and assisting people with disabilities. "The future is ours," Ava said with a smile. "And we're building it together. With technology, yes, but with a deep sense of responsibility. It's about creating something that doesn't just work for us, but works for everyone." As Musk looked at the next generation, he knew that his job was far from over. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but he had done something few others had managed to do. He had shifted the conversation. He had sparked a global movement, one where the future wasn't a threat to humanity, but an opportunity for humanity to evolve alongside its technologies. And so, as SpaceX prepared for its historic mission to Mars and Tesla continued to push the boundaries of electric mobility, Elon Musk realized that the true revolution was no longer about the machines themselves. It was about how we, as a species, chose to use them. The world had adapted, and in many ways, it had adapted because of him. And as the first humans prepared to set foot on Mars, they weren't just reaching for the stars. They were reaching for a future where technology and humanity could coexist, thrive, and evolve together. It was a cool, crisp morning in Hawthorne, California. The quiet hum of progress buzzed through the SpaceX headquarters as engineers and astronauts prepared for what many had called humanity's most ambitious endeavor yet, the first crewed mission to Mars. Elon Musk stood at the edge of the SpaceX launch pad, his hands tucked into his jacket pockets, eyes fixed on the towering Starship, the massive rocket that would carry humanity's dreams beyond Earth's orbit. After years of planning, testing, and setbacks, the moment of truth had arrived. The mission to Mars wasn't just about reaching a new planet. It was about proving that humanity could adapt, collaborate, and overcome the challenges of an uncertain future. Musk wasn't alone in his anticipation. Standing beside him was Dr. Ava Williams, the brilliant young scientist who had been instrumental in developing the technology that would support life on Mars. As part of the Mars initiative, Ava was set to join the crew of the Starship Perseverance, the first spacecraft designed to carry humans to the Red Planet. "It's hard to believe we're really doing this," Ava said, her voice filled with awe. "All those years of dreaming, the setbacks, the doubts, it's all led to this moment." Musk nodded, a rare expression of vulnerability crossing his face. He had always believed in the mission, in the vision of making humanity a multiplanetary species, but even now, at the precipice of success, the weight of it all felt heavier than he expected. "I never doubted it for a second," Musk replied with a smile, though his eyes were distant, as if peering beyond the pad to some distant horizon. "But I did wonder whether we were ready for what comes next. The real test isn't reaching Mars, it's how we handle what happens after we land." The final countdown to launch was only days away, and preparations were in full swing. While much of the world had focused on the technical aspects of the mission, the rocket, the life support systems, and the advanced AI that would help guide the crew, Musk and his team knew that the most challenging aspect of colonizing Mars wouldn't be the science. It would be humanity itself. The mission to Mars was unprecedented, not just in terms of technology, but in its philosophical implications. The colony Musk envisioned wasn't just a scientific outpost or a research station. It was meant to be a new society, one built from scratch. And as much as Musk had thought about the technical aspects, the question of what kind of society they would create on Mars loomed large. What's the point of reaching Mars if we can't make it a place where people can thrive? Musk often said in meetings with his team, "We have a chance to start fresh, to do it right. And we can't forget the lessons we've learned here on Earth." The Mars colony would be small at first, just a handful of astronauts, scientists, and engineers working in harmony to create a sustainable habitat. The systems they would use to grow food, generate power, and recycle air and water had been rigorously tested on Earth and were now ready for the harsh conditions of Mars. But Musk knew that success wouldn't come from technology alone. It would come from the people who built the colony, from the way they worked together to overcome the unimaginable challenges of living on a new planet. Musk and his team had spent countless hours discussing governance. What would the colony's rules look like? How would they resolve conflicts? Would Mars be a beacon of equality and inclusivity, or would it repeat the same mistakes humanity had made on Earth? For all of Musk's ambition, he understood that the human element was the one variable that could not be controlled. "We can't let technology become the new authority," Musk often reminded the team. "We have to build a society that respects human rights, that values empathy, and that places the well-being of individuals above all else. If we get that wrong, everything else will fall apart." It was a philosophy that had shaped SpaceX's approach to colonization. While many had seen Mars as a race to be won, Musk saw it as a new beginning, a chance to rebuild from the ground up, to create something sustainable, equitable, and truly human. The crew of the Starship Perseverance had been carefully selected. It wasn't just their scientific prowess or technical expertise that made them stand out. It was their ability to collaborate, to handle the psychological pressure of long-duration space travel, and to think critically about the long-term mission of establishing a new society on Mars. Dr. Ava Williams, the mission's chief scientist, was a perfect example of the ideal candidate. A brilliant mind with a deep understanding of both science and ethics, Ava had already proven herself in the field of bioengineering, working on the life support systems that would sustain the first settlers on Mars. But it wasn't just about brains. The crew needed to be resilient, emotionally and mentally strong enough to survive in the isolated, dangerous environment of Mars. Captain Liam Torres, a veteran astronaut with a calm demeanor and a sharp strategic mind, was the perfect leader for the mission. And then there was Dr. Emily Zhang, a psychologist and expert in group dynamics, tasked with ensuring that the crew could maintain their mental health in the face of immense isolation and uncertainty. "The human factor is the hardest to predict," Emily had said in a meeting just days before launch. "We've trained for every scenario, but we can't train for how each individual will react to the psychological pressure of being thousands of miles from home with no way to communicate directly with Earth. That's the real unknown." While the crew had been through intense simulations on Earth, they were aware that Mars would be different. The space between Earth and Mars, the distance, the isolation, was unlike anything they had ever experienced. It wasn't just the physical challenges they would face, it was the emotional toll. "We've trained for the mission," Captain Torres said to the crew one evening, his voice steady. "But we've also trained to support each other, to build the kind of community we need to make this work. Mars is just the beginning. What we do here, together, will set the foundation for everything that follows." And so, with the weight of the future on their shoulders, the crew of the Starship Perseverance stood ready to embark on the greatest journey humanity had ever undertaken. As the day of the launch grew nearer, Musk found himself reflecting on everything that had brought him to this point. The road to Mars had been long, longer than he'd ever anticipated. He had dreamed of this moment for years, but the reality of it was overwhelming. There were times when he'd wondered whether humanity was truly ready for such a monumental leap. But now, standing on the precipice of history, Musk had a profound sense of purpose. This wasn't about him anymore. This was about the future of humanity, the possibility of a new chapter in the story of human civilization. And he knew, in the depths of his heart, that Mars was only the beginning. "We are a species of explorers," Musk said to a group of journalists at a press conference just before launch. "We've always looked to the stars. And now, for the first time, We have the chance to create a future where humanity can truly thrive, not just on Earth, but on another planet. It's the greatest adventure we've ever undertaken." As he spoke, Musk's gaze drifted toward the horizon, where the starship stood poised for its mission. There was uncertainty ahead. The mission was dangerous, the challenges immense, but there was also hope, the kind of hope that could only come from reaching for something greater than ourselves. And with that hope, Musk knew that the real mission had only just begun. The future wasn't just waiting for humanity to catch up. It was waiting for us to create it. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The starship Perseverance cut through the darkness of space like a gleaming silver arrow, its engines humming with controlled power. Outside the massive windows of the spacecraft, the distant glow of Mars loomed ever larger, a small, rust-colored orb slowly coming into focus, its surface bathed in the eerie light of the distant sun. For the crew aboard the starship, this was no longer a dream. It was reality. Elon Musk had said it many times. The real test isn't reaching Mars, it's how we handle what happens when we get there. And now, as the first humans ever prepared to land on the Red Planet, that test was about to begin. Inside the cockpit, Captain Liam Torres sat at the helm, his fingers lightly grazing the touch controls. His heart raced, though his face remained calm. Behind him, Dr. Ava Williams, the chief scientist, was deep in concentration, scanning telemetry data on her tablet, ensuring that everything was in place for a safe landing. The rest of the crew, Dr. Emily Zhang, the team psychologist, and the engineers Ravi Patel and Ariana Martinez, were equally focused, though a sense of quiet anticipation filled the air. They all knew the stakes, not just for the mission, but for the future of humanity. 30 minutes to touchdown, Liam announced in a steady voice, breaking the silence. "We're ready," Ava said, her eyes glued to the monitors in front of her. "All systems are green. We've been through this 100 times in simulations. It's just another step." But they all knew it wasn't just another step. This was the beginning of something historic. As the starship Perseverance descended through the thin Martian atmosphere, the crew felt the jolt of entry. It was a sensation none of them had experienced in reality, though they had all been through numerous simulations. The atmosphere on Mars was only about 1% as thick as Earth's, but the high-speed descent and the rocky terrain beneath made the landing process anything but smooth. The ship's thrusters fired in calculated bursts, guiding it down toward the Ares V landing zone, a flat, relatively safe area chosen for its proximity to an old Martian riverbed. The dust kicked up beneath the lander as it descended, creating a haze that momentarily obscured their view. "We've got this," Liam said, his voice calm but taut with focus. "All hands, brace for landing." Seconds later, the ship's landing legs touched the Martian surface with a heavy but controlled thud. The crew members felt their weight shift as the ship settled into place. It was over. They had landed. They had arrived. The feeling in the cabin was surreal. Silence. For a moment, no one spoke. They simply absorbed the magnitude of the moment. "We did it," Ariana whispered, her voice shaking with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Ava was the first to stand, her eyes wide as she unstrapped herself from her seat and turned to face the small, transparent window. Through it, the barren, rocky Martian landscape stretched endlessly. The dusty orange terrain was illuminated by the pale, distant sun. "Look at that," she breathed. "It's real." The crew members joined her, one by one, each of them taking in the scene. It was nothing like Earth. The air was thin, and the sky was a dull, dusty orange. But the land itself was beautiful, alien in a way that felt ancient and yet new, all at once. "A new chapter in human history," Liam said, stepping up beside them. After the initial euphoria of the landing began to settle, the crew moved into action. Their mission was just beginning, and there was no time to waste. Mars was not a hospitable planet. The dangers were everywhere, from the thin atmosphere to the extreme temperatures, and they had limited resources. The first priority was to ensure the safety and sustainability of the base. Ava and Ravi began checking the life support systems that had been carefully designed to ensure they could survive here for months, if not years. The habitat module was a self-sustaining unit that included air recycling, water filtration, and farming pods for food production. It had been tested extensively on Earth, but this was the real test. Now, on Mars, nothing could be left to chance. Meanwhile, Dr. Emily Zhang was coordinating with the team to ensure the mental well-being of the crew. It was easy to be excited now, with the mission just underway, but she knew that isolation, the extreme environment, and the knowledge that they were millions of miles away from Earth would soon take a toll. "We need to maintain routine," she reminded them during their first team meeting on the Martian surface. "Work together, check in with each other, and make sure we're all staying connected. Our mental health is as important as our physical survival." Emily's words hung in the air as they all sat together for the first time on Mars, looking at each other with a mix of excitement and uncertainty. "We've made history," Liam said, breaking the silence. "But the real work starts now. Let's not forget what we're here for. We're not just here to explore Mars. We're here to build a future." Ava nodded. "That's right. We're not just looking at Mars. We're looking beyond it. We're laying the groundwork for the future of humanity." As the crew set about constructing the first permanent habitat on Mars, Elon Musk watched from Earth, his heart swelling with pride. The moment was everything he had dreamed of, but it was also just the beginning. Musk knew that the real challenge was not landing on Mars, but what would happen after. The vision for Mars was never just about exploration. It was about creating a new society, one that could serve as a model for future generations. A society where technology and humanity work together to create something sustainable and ethical. A society where human values came first. But that vision came with obstacles. The colony would need resources, both from Earth and from Mars itself. They would need to terraform the environment, create energy systems capable of powering their survival, and establish an infrastructure to support growing numbers of settlers. The journey ahead would be fraught with uncertainty, but the foundations were being laid, right there, on the Martian surface. "Mars isn't going to be easy," Musk said during a press conference broadcast to millions of viewers on Earth. "But it's an opportunity to make sure that humanity has a future that isn't just about surviving on Earth, but thriving beyond it. It's about ensuring that we don't just repeat the mistakes of the past, but build something better." Musk's words resonated deeply with those listening, especially those who had followed his career and believed in his vision for the future. The idea of a multiplanetary species, the idea of creating a sustainable future beyond Earth, was no longer a distant dream. It was real, tangible, and beginning to unfold before their eyes. As the first day on Mars drew to a close, the crew gathered around the small, self-sustaining fire pit inside the habitat module. Outside, the Martian sky darkened, and the stars shone brighter than ever before. They sat in quiet reflection, watching as the first Martian night settled in. It was cold outside, bitterly cold, but inside the habitat, they were safe. For the first time, they realized that the most important part of this mission wasn't the landing or the technology. It was the human spirit, the drive to push forward, to make a better future, no matter the odds. "We're not just explorers," Emily said, her voice thoughtful. "We're pioneers. We're creating something that will last long after we're gone." Ava nodded, staring into the fire. "We're building the foundation for humanity's future, and it all starts here." The first few weeks on Mars had been exhilarating, filled with moments of awe and wonder. But now, as the crew settled into their new rhythm, the gravity of their situation began to sink in. The harsh reality of surviving on Mars was much more complex than they had imagined. The thrill of landing had faded, and the long, slow work of establishing a permanent human presence on the red planet had begun. Inside the habitat module, Captain Liam Torres was monitoring the systems. The life support was stable, but just one failure, one small error, could be catastrophic. Mars didn't forgive mistakes. Outside, the starship Perseverance stood as a silent monument to their arrival, while the barren Martian landscape stretched endlessly in all directions. The crew had set up a small but effective greenhouse, Ava Williams overseeing the initial crops that were meant to sustain them in the long term. But even something as fundamental as food was a complex challenge. Growing crops in Martian soil, using the limited resources available, was a test that no one could fully predict. "This isn't Earth," Ava muttered to herself, inspecting the progress of the Martian soil experiment. The plants were growing slowly, their roots reaching toward the limited water supply they had painstakingly generated through water condensation systems. "It's going to take time. We need to be patient." The greenhouse was one of the first steps toward creating a sustainable colony, but the reality of living on Mars meant more than just growing food. It meant creating everything from scratch: energy, air, water, and relying on systems that, though carefully designed, had never been tested in such a harsh environment. It meant becoming self-sufficient in ways they couldn't have imagined. While the physical challenges of surviving on Mars were immense, the psychological toll was just as real. The isolation, the disconnection from Earth, and the lack of any immediate human contact were beginning to affect the crew. They hadn't seen another human being in weeks. There were no bustling cities, no voices or faces from home, just the quiet hum of the habitat and the endless silence of Mars. Dr. Emily Zhang, the psychologist on the team, had seen it coming. As the crew's mental health officer, she had prepared for the stresses of long-term space travel. But no amount of training could prepare them for the loneliness of being the only humans on another planet. Emily sat with each crew member individually, checking in on their mental well-being. She had learned the importance of routine. Structure in their days would keep the crew grounded. Staying busy keeps the isolation at bay. She reminded them during one of their early meetings. "We need to keep up with our tasks, keep up with each other, and not let the distance from Earth become a barrier to our well-being." But Emily couldn't ignore the subtle signs of strain. Liam had become more withdrawn. He was still a strong leader, but the burden of responsibility weighed on him more heavily now. Ariana, the engineer, had started to show signs of irritability, the kind of stress that comes when you're trapped in a confined space for too long. Even Ravi, the always positive technical specialist, had moments of quiet introspection when he would sit for hours staring out the window at the Martian horizon, lost in thought. "This is harder than I thought it would be," Ravi admitted to Emily one evening, his voice tinged with vulnerability. "I signed up for this to make history, but I didn't realize how much it would feel like being alone. Really alone." Emily listened, nodding slowly. "It's okay to feel that way. You're not the only one." She had heard similar sentiments from the rest of the crew. Mars wasn't just an environmental challenge, it was a mental one, too. As the weeks passed, Emily and the crew began to realize that mental resilience would be as crucial to their survival as any piece of technology. In a way, Mars wasn't just a physical frontier. It was a social frontier. The colony needed to foster a sense of belonging and purpose if they were to thrive. Emily encouraged the crew to spend time together, to share meals, to talk about their experiences. "We need to be more than a team," she told them. "We need to be a community." It was a gradual process. At first, everyone stuck to their tasks, trying to keep the systems running smoothly. But slowly, they began to share more. They started playing games together in the evening, watching Earth movies from their small collection, and telling stories of their lives before Mars. They found small moments of comfort in these rituals, even though they were far from home. "Do you think we'll ever go back?" Ariana asked one night, her voice soft but curious. The question lingered in the air. There were no easy answers. None of them had signed up for a short-term mission. They were pioneers, sent to create a new beginning. Going back to Earth wasn't a guarantee. They were building something that could eventually support life for generations. Mars was their new home, and, for better or worse, Earth was a world they might never see again. "Maybe we'll never go back," Liam said after a long pause. "But what if that's not a bad thing? What if, instead of going back, we're going forward?" His words sparked something in the group. Slowly but surely, they began to embrace the idea that Mars wasn't just a place they had landed on. It was a place they had the potential to transform, to shape, to call home. They were the first, but they wouldn't be the last. Just as the crew began to adjust to life on Mars, an unexpected problem arose. One of the life support systems, responsible for maintaining the breathable air inside the habitat, began to show signs of malfunction. The oxygen levels dropped slightly, enough to trigger an alert in the monitoring system. "What's going on?" Liam demanded as he saw the readings. Ava and Ravi immediately went into action, running diagnostics and checking the system's backup procedures. It wasn't catastrophic, but it was a reminder that in an environment as unforgiving as Mars, nothing could be taken for granted. It's a minor issue with the filtration system, Ravi explained after a tense hour of troubleshooting, but it's something we can fix. The crew worked together to resolve the issue. It wasn't a simple fix. They had to rely on their limited supplies and the improvisational skills they had honed in their Earth-based training. It took hours, but eventually, the oxygen levels returned to normal. When the crisis passed, the crew let out a collective sigh of relief. But the tension remained. It was a sobering reminder of just how fragile their existence was on Mars. A minor malfunction could become a major disaster. And with no way to contact Earth instantly, they were completely dependent on themselves. "This is what it's really about," Ava said quietly, looking out at the red horizon. "It's not just the big moments, it's the small ones, the ones that could break us if we don't stay on top of everything." The crisis passed, but it left its mark. It reminded the crew that life on Mars wasn't about the big victories, but the small, steady wins that allowed them to survive. It was about resilience, adapting, problem-solving, and pulling together as a community. Over the next few weeks, the crew's bond deepened. They learned to rely on each other in ways they hadn't expected, and they began to see the future of Mars not as a collection of obstacles, but as an opportunity to build something enduring, a place where humanity could thrive beyond Earth. "We're making it," Liam said one evening as they stood together outside, looking up at the stars. "Not just survive. We're making it." The crew had found their footing. They were no longer just visitors to Mars. They were part of something larger, a new world in the making, and they were ready to take the next step. The Martian dawn arrived with a quiet glow, the red sky shifting from dark to light in an eerie, almost dreamlike fashion. The crew of Starship Perseverance had long since adjusted to the isolation, the cold, and the endless stretch of barren terrain. But today was different. Today, they would begin something even more monumental than just surviving. They would start building the first permanent structures on Mars. Inside the habitat module, Captain Liam Torres stood over a blueprint, his eyes scanning the layout of the first Martian settlement. The plans had been meticulously drawn on Earth, but now, standing here, they felt distant, almost theoretical. The real work, he knew, would be in the execution. "We're not just laying bricks," Liam muttered to himself, folding the plans. "We're laying the foundation of human civilization." Ava Williams walked over to his side, a reassuring smile on her face. "And that starts with every little thing we do. We can't rush it, but we can't let it slow us down either." The crew had been working for weeks to get the habitat functional, focusing on life support systems, growing crops, and ensuring their survival. Now, however, it was time to expand, to begin shaping Mars into a place that could support more people. Their first task was to begin construction on the Martian outpost, the next step toward building a self-sustaining colony that could one day grow into a thriving settlement. The outpost would be a modular structure designed to provide additional living space, laboratories, and, eventually, manufacturing capabilities. This structure would also house the first Martian factory, a critical piece of their plan to create a sustainable economy. With the Starship Perseverance acting as their primary transport and supply hub, the crew had no choice but to work with what they had. "We need to get this right," Ravi Patel said as he stood beside the massive construction modules. His hands were covered in Martian dust as he checked over the landing gear of the building's components. "These modules will be the heart of the colony. If we screw this up, we're in trouble." Ariana Martinez, the other engineer on the team, chimed in. "We've got the tools, we've got the materials, and we've got each other. Let's get this done." The task seemed straightforward in theory. Using the available modules, the crew would assemble the first basic structure, essentially building an extension to the habitat module. These modular units were already designed to handle the unique conditions of Mars, extreme temperatures, radiation, and the low atmospheric pressure. They were prefabricated units, but assembling them on Mars was a different story altogether. Ariana and Ravi led the engineering efforts, but it was a true team effort. Everyone pitched in, from Ava, who assisted with the biological aspects of the structure, ensuring that the interior would be capable of supporting plant life, to Emily, who focused on the mental health aspects of the settlement's design. It was clear that creating a new society wasn't just about technology. It was about people. This is a good thing, Ariana said, as she worked alongside Ravi to install the first external solar panel array. We're not just building a shelter. We're making a future. The first stage of their work was relatively simple, assembling the basic structure and ensuring energy and water systems were functioning. The energy came from solar panels, carefully designed to collect energy from the weak sunlight that reached Mars. Their water supply was limited and had to be carefully monitored, harvested from the Martian atmosphere via condensation systems, and purified through advanced filtration processes. Every ounce of water was precious. Every watt of power needed to be accounted for. But as the weeks went by, the crew quickly realized that self-sustainability meant far more than just power and water. They needed a local production system to create everything from food to tools. The idea was to use Mars resources to build resources. With no reliable access to Earth, the crew was reliant on themselves. This led to the next monumental task, the first Martian factory. "We're going to need machines that make machines," Ravi said one evening, his voice tinged with both excitement and trepidation. "We're going to need a 3D printer capable of making parts for more printers. Without that, we won't be able to scale up." "But it's also risky." Ava glanced up from her tablet. "What if we're not ready for that kind of production yet?" "It's a risk we have to take," Ravi replied. "Mars isn't going to build itself. If we don't start now, we'll always be limited by what we can carry from Earth." While the construction process progressed, the crew continued to face their own growing pains. With the isolation beginning to weigh heavier, they found themselves in a delicate balancing act between work and mental well-being. Emily was especially attuned to this. As they added more and more responsibilities, from construction to research, she encouraged the crew to maintain balance. "We need to be careful," Emily said during one of their regular meetings. "It's easy to burn out. The work is hard, and it feels never-ending. But we need to pace ourselves, stay connected, and remember why we're here." "To make Mars a place to live," Liam said, nodding in agreement. "But we need to take care of ourselves first. If we fall apart, we're done." The idea of burnout was something no one had truly anticipated. The stress of creating the first Martian settlement was compounded by the constant pressure of being in a harsh, unforgiving environment. As the days stretched on, they learned that it wasn't enough to be pioneers of technology. They also had to be pioneers of emotional endurance. One of the most important moments came one late evening when Ariana and Liam stood together on the newly built observation platform of their habitat. It was the first time they had a chance to really look at the settlement as a whole. The new outpost stood proud, a testament to their work. Solar panels gleamed in the low Martian sun, and the early crops Ava had planted in the greenhouse were beginning to show signs of growth. It wasn't much yet, but it was enough to make them feel something they hadn't felt in a long time: hope. "We did it," Ariana said, her voice breaking the silence. "We've built something." Liam stood beside her, looking out over the landscape, the red horizon, the distant craters, the stark, empty beauty of Mars. "It's just the beginning," he replied quietly, "but it's a start." The weeks following the completion of the initial outpost were filled with a mixture of exhilaration and unease. The crew of Starship Perseverance had managed to lay the groundwork for the first permanent human settlement on Mars, but as they moved beyond basic survival, the complexity of their task grew exponentially. There was no denying the gravity of their mission. They weren't just building structures or growing crops. They were laying the foundation for a new way of life, an entire civilization, on an alien world. And while the excitement of their success was palpable, it was also evident that the risks and challenges ahead were just beginning to unfold. The first real test of their self-sufficiency came in the form of energy. Although they had relied on solar panels for power, the Martian environment wasn't as predictable as they'd hoped. The dust storms, while not frequent, were powerful enough to reduce the efficiency of their panels, sometimes for days at a time. "We're running at only 40% capacity," Ravi reported one morning, his voice tinged with concern. "And it's not going to get better until the storm passes. We've got a week, maybe two, before we need to look at backup options." "We can't afford to wait," Liam replied, pacing the room. "We need to come up with a solution now. We're already running low on power for the habitat, life support, and the growing lab. If we can't power the water filtration system, things could get bad real fast. Ariana, who had been working on expanding the solar array, quickly began brainstorming options. There's a backup hydrogen generator in the storage module, she suggested. It's not ideal. It's not as efficient as the solar panels, and we can't rely on it for long. But if we use it sparingly, it should give us just enough power until the storm clears. They agreed to implement the emergency power plan, though it wasn't a perfect solution. The crew would need to ration power, reducing non-essential functions and only using critical equipment when absolutely necessary. The next few days were tense as they carefully monitored the systems, ensuring that the oxygen supply remained at safe levels and that the water recycling systems didn't drop below critical levels. Everyone was forced to work in near silence, aware that their survival depended on every decision they made. While the power situation remained in flux, the next significant challenge emerged as the crew prepared to test the new Martian habitat prototypes. With the outposts set up, the focus now shifted toward building more permanent and complex living spaces. They couldn't afford to wait for supplies from Earth forever, and to truly thrive, they would need to manufacture many of the materials locally. Using the Mars-based 3D printers they had carefully set up, the crew began experimenting with regolith, the Martian soil, to create bricks and materials for building walls and floors. The idea was revolutionary, to create construction materials out of the planet itself. But there was a problem. Martian regolith was much more fragile than Earth-based soil, and the process of creating durable building materials was slow and uncertain. This is going to take time, Ava said as she sifted through the regolith samples, adjusting the chemical mix for the 3D printer. We can't rush this. We need something that will withstand the Martian weather and the pressure inside these habitats. And we need to make sure it's safe for long-term use, Emily added, worried about the psychological impact if the habitats weren't safe. We've already had close calls with the life support systems. I don't want to think about what might happen if the structure starts to fail. It was another reminder that the stakes were higher than any of them had anticipated. They weren't just building a colony. They were creating a new world, and every decision carried the weight of that responsibility. As the days wore on and the stresses mounted, the crew began to show signs of fatigue. Ravi was the first to notice. He had always been the most optimistic of the group, but now he seemed withdrawn. "It's like we're trapped in a pressure cooker," he remarked one evening, his tone more serious than usual. "There's only so much we can do before something's going to give, and it could be any of us." Liam, who had been working tirelessly to keep the mission moving forward, also noticed the strain. "We can't afford to burn out," he said during a meeting with Emily. "We need to keep our heads together. If we can't stay strong mentally, the physical work won't matter." Emily nodded. "I know. I've been seeing it in everyone. Subtle things. People are more irritable, more withdrawn. The pressure is getting to all of us." She suggested regular meditation sessions and team-building activities, small ways to help the crew reconnect. At first, the crew had been skeptical, unsure of how something as simple as a group dinner or meditation could make a difference in their work. But as the days dragged on, even the smallest moments of human connection became essential to their survival. "We need to remember why we're doing this," Emily encouraged them. "We're not just here for the research. We're here to build something bigger. And we can't do that if we're falling apart." It was an ongoing challenge, but slowly, the crew began to realize that Mars wasn't just testing them physically. It was testing them mentally and emotionally as well. Just as the crew was settling into their routines and pushing through the most difficult days, they received unexpected news. The next scheduled resupply mission from Earth had been delayed by at least 6 months due to technical issues. Their resupply, the ship that would bring them critical supplies like food, fuel, and new equipment, was not coming. The news hit hard. Without the supplies from Earth, they would have to rely on their ingenuity, their resources, and their existing equipment. 6 months? Liam said, rubbing his temples in frustration. "We're going to have to make do without fresh supplies. We can't afford to lose momentum." "We've been preparing for this," Ariana said, trying to stay positive. "We've got everything we need, the printers, the life support, the greenhouse. We've got enough supplies to make it through if we're careful." "But we can't keep doing this forever," Liam replied. "We need to think longer term. We need to look beyond just surviving." It was a turning point. The crew had been moving forward based on the assumption that they would receive regular supplies from Earth. Now, with 6 months of uncertainty ahead, they faced a stark reality. Mars was not just a place for exploration. It was a place for adaptation and reinvention. For Liam, this moment of uncertainty felt like a crucible. It was a test of leadership, a test of resilience. It wasn't just about leading the team through the physical tasks anymore. It was about making them believe in the vision, even when there was no clear answer. "We'll get through this," Liam said, his voice firm. "We always do. And when Earth looks back at us, they'll see not just a group of survivors. They'll see a community, a society, a future." The harsh, red landscape of Mars stretched endlessly beyond the settlement. As Starship Perseverance's crew looked out over the barren planet, they faced an unprecedented dilemma. Survival was no longer just about managing resources. It was about making a choice that would shape the future of human life on Mars, and perhaps even the future of humankind itself. With the news of a 6-month resupply delay still fresh in their minds, the crew was on edge. The tension in the air was palpable. The once hopeful feeling of pioneering a new world had been replaced by the stark reality of their situation. The systems were holding up, barely, but they all knew that Mars wasn't a forgiving place. A single mistake could mean catastrophe. The meeting room, now more crowded than usual, buzzed with low murmurs. Liam, as the mission commander, called the crew to order. His face was tired, drawn from days of endless problem-solving. "We need to make a decision. The 6-month delay changes everything. Do we continue with our plans to expand the settlement, or do we pull back and focus solely on maintaining what we have? We've been working with limited resources already. Can we really risk overextending?" Ravi, the missions engineer, was the first to speak up. He had been working nonstop on a new solar power enhancement project, a way to boost their energy output during dust storms. He looked up from the table, his eyes tired but resolute. "We've been expanding for months. We've built the outpost. The first crops are growing. Pulling back now would be a huge setback. If we don't keep pushing, if we don't establish a self-sustaining colony, we're just another failed mission on Mars." But Emily, the psychologist, raised a hand, her expression serious. "I understand the need to keep moving forward, but we can't ignore the fact that we're all burning out. 6 more months without resupply? That's a huge burden. We've been running on fumes for weeks. Can we afford to risk pushing our physical and mental limits any further?" A long silence followed, each member of the crew lost in thought. Emily was right. The emotional toll of living in isolation, combined with the pressure of building something that had never been done before, was wearing on everyone. The crew had always been close, but now the cracks in their unity were beginning to show. "We're pushing boundaries," Liam finally spoke, his voice steady but filled with the weight of leadership. "But we're not just pushing for the sake of it. We're here because we believe in something bigger than ourselves. A future on Mars is possible, and we're the ones who have to make that happen. We have to take risks." After hours of heated discussion, the team reached a compromise. The decision was made. They would continue expanding the colony, but with a new strategy, one focused on maximizing their existing resources and minimizing risk. The priority would shift towards sustainable living and resource independence. They would focus on building the first Martian greenhouses, scaling up their hydroponic systems, and developing more efficient water extraction methods. They would push forward with manufacturing equipment locally, using Martian regolith to create construction materials. They would continue enhancing their solar arrays to increase power output, but they would no longer rely on aggressive expansion. In short, they would begin the hard, slow work of making Mars not just livable, but self-sustaining, and they would do it at their own pace. It was a calculated risk, but it was the only path forward. "This is no longer about just surviving," Liam concluded. "It's about building, one step at a time. And if we succeed, we'll have the foundation for something extraordinary." The next few weeks were crucial. The decision to focus on sustainability meant doubling down on life support systems and food production. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was necessary. If they couldn't produce enough food locally, they wouldn't last long enough to see the resupply mission arrive. Ava, the biologist, took the lead in setting up the first Martian greenhouse. It wasn't much, just a small section of the outpost habitat with artificial lighting and climate control systems. But it was a lifeline. They started with small, hardy plants, potatoes, lettuce, and radishes. They couldn't afford to fail. These plants are more than food, Ava said as she adjusted the hydroponic systems. They're a symbol of our future here. If we can grow food, we can grow life. Ravi worked on integrating the greenhouse with their water recycling system, while Ariana adjusted the nutrient mix for the hydroponic growing medium. Slowly, they began to see results. The plants began to grow, albeit slowly, in the artificial atmosphere they had created. Each small green sprout was a victory. But just as the greenhouse began to show signs of success, disaster struck. One afternoon, as the crew gathered for their regular check-in, an alarm went off, the unmistakable, harsh sound of an emergency alert. The water filtration system had failed. Ravi's heart sank as he rushed to the control panel. What happened? Liam demanded, standing beside him. It's the filtration system. Something's clogging the intake. It's not just the greenhouse. This could take down the entire habitat if we don't fix it fast. The crew immediately sprang into action. The failure of the water system was a crisis. Without clean water, they couldn't survive. And without clean water, the greenhouse would die too. Ariana, who had been monitoring the water systems, quickly diagnosed the problem. It's a buildup of minerals in the filtration unit. The Martian atmosphere is different. It's causing deposits to form in the filters. We need to manually clean them. As they worked tirelessly to repair the system, the weight of the situation became clear. Mars was relentless. It tested them at every turn, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, and even technologically. One misstep, one failure, could erase everything they had worked for. But there was no turning back. By the end of the day, the water filtration system was restored, and the greenhouse plants were safe, for now. As the crew gathered together in the common area, their exhausted faces reflected a quiet understanding. They had faced another crisis, and they had survived. But it wasn't just the technology or the systems that had kept them going. It was their resilience. They had been knocked down again and again, and yet they kept getting back up. We're still here, Liam said, his voice calm but filled with pride. We've been tested, but we're still standing. We've come a long way, Emily added, a small smile breaking through the tension. And we'll keep going. Together. And for the first time in weeks, the crew began to relax, just a little. They knew that Mars wasn't just testing them. It was shaping them into something new. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were beginning to thrive. And that was just the beginning. As the Martian sky shifted from orange to the familiar shades of deep red, a sense of unease settled over the crew of Starship Perseverance. It had been a few weeks since they had successfully stabilized their water filtration system, and the greenhouse was thriving. But Mars, as always, had other plans. A massive dust storm was brewing, one far larger than any they had encountered before. It's a Category 5, Ravi said, his face grim as he studied the weather reports. It's coming in fast. If the storm is as bad as they predict, it could last for days, maybe weeks. We need to prepare. A Category 5? Liam echoed, his brow furrowing. He had been through storms before, but this sounded different. That could wipe out everything we've built. Not if we can get the system secured, Ariana said, quickly running through the plans for the solar arrays, the greenhouse, and the habitat's external structures. We've reinforced everything, but the power. We'll need to be ready to rely on backup systems. The team sprang into action, each person taking responsibility for a different part of the colony. They secured the greenhouse, powered down non-essential equipment, and ensured that their backup power systems were fully charged. As the storm approached, the usual steady hum of the outpost systems began to fade, replaced by an eerie silence. It was as if Mars itself was holding its breath. The next few hours would determine the fate of their colony and their lives. The storm hit around midnight, rattling the outpost with a violence that none of them had truly prepared for. The wind speed reached 150 miles per hour, enough to send debris flying, create pressure changes that shook the walls, and cast an impenetrable cloud of dust over the entire settlement. The sun was blotted out, and the red haze outside seemed endless. Inside the habitat, the crew gathered in the common area, monitoring the storm's progress. The hum of the backup systems could be heard faintly in the background, but the storm had cut them off from the outside world. The window views, which had once offered a glimpse of the Martian landscape, were now completely obscured. "How's the solar array?" Liam asked, his voice tense. "Down to 10% efficiency," Ravi reported. "We'll be running on backup for the next few days." "Not good enough," Liam muttered, pacing back and forth. "We're going to have to conserve everything: power, food, water." "We're back in survival mode." Emily and Ariana exchanged a worried glance. The crew had worked hard to make Mars livable, but they were about to face a new level of vulnerability. With their main power source down, they had no choice but to rely on each other, not just for their survival, but for their mental health as well. As the storm continued its relentless assault, the crew found themselves confined in the habitat for days. The dust outside made it impossible to see beyond the walls of their small outpost. The lack of sunlight weighed heavily on everyone's spirits. They had spent months pushing toward this moment, but now that it had arrived, they felt the isolation more deeply than ever. "I hate this," Ravi muttered one evening, staring out into the opaque dust storm. "I thought we were ready, but this is different." "It's Mars," Liam replied quietly, looking out the same window, his arms folded across his chest. "It's always going to be different." The isolation was palpable. While the mission had always been about building something bigger than themselves, the reality of it, the loneliness, the uncertainty, the immense pressure, was starting to take its toll. In the quiet, even the smallest mistakes seemed amplified. "We're losing power in the backup systems," Ariana called out, breaking the silence. "We're going to have to switch to manual backup. The main life support systems are fine, but anything extra is going to have to be turned off." As the crew began to ration everything, they faced a difficult truth. This was no longer just a test of technology. This was a test of unity. If they couldn't work together, if they let the storm break their resolve, their dream of a permanent Martian colony could end right then and there. The storm raged on for days. Supplies were running low, and the backup systems were holding, but just barely. The crew was exhausted, physically and emotionally drained by the constant pressure. It was during these long, tense hours that the cracks in their cohesion began to show. "We've got to do something about the food supplies," Emily said on the fourth day of the storm. "We're running out faster than we thought. If the storm lasts much longer, we're going to have to cut rations." "Cut rations?" Ravi snapped. "We've already been cutting them. We're barely eating anything as it is." "I know," Emily said, her voice strained, "but we don't have a choice. We can't keep running on empty. If we don't have enough food and water, we won't make it through." Liam, sensing the growing tension, stepped in. "We're all on edge. I get it, but we have to stay calm. We have a plan. We just have to stick to it." But the storm had drained everyone, and tempers were fraying. Small arguments broke out over trivial things: the allocation of resources, the length of shifts, who was in charge of what task. No one was immune. As the days blurred together in the storm's unyielding embrace, the stress seemed unbearable. "We're not going to make it through this," Ariana whispered to herself, looking at the dwindling food stores. Her eyes were red-rimmed from exhaustion. "We're just not going to make it." But then something unexpected happened. Just as the crew was nearing their breaking point, there was a shift in the air. The storm had finally begun to subside. The winds started to die down, the dust settled, and the sun, that distant, ever-elusive beacon, peeked through the clouds. When the storm finally cleared, the crew stood outside, blinking in the light of the Martian sun. The landscape had been reshaped. The dust now settled like a fine layer of sand across everything. But the worst was over. They had made it through. "We did it," Liam said, his voice hoarse from the days of tension. "We're still here." The outpost was intact, and the crew, though worn and tired, stood together, having survived one of the harshest tests Mars could throw at them. There was a moment of quiet relief. The storm had passed, and the future was still in their hands. But they all knew that the challenges had only just begun. Mars had shown them its wrath, but they had endured. They had proven that they could survive not just the planet's physical dangers, but its ability to push them to their limits mentally and emotionally. "This is what we came for," Liam said, looking out at the landscape, the horizon endless before them. "We didn't just come to survive. We came to thrive. And now, we know we can." The storm had passed, but the calm that followed was deceptive. Mars, as always, had a way of reminding the crew that even in its quiet moments, it was a force to be reckoned with. The landscape outside had shifted. The dust now settled in drifts, coating every surface of the settlement. The solar arrays were buried under a thick layer of Martian sand, and the greenhouse had sustained damage from the winds, its artificial atmosphere barely holding. Inside, the crew found themselves confronting the aftermath of the storm. The systems they had worked so hard to build now in disrepair, their resources strained to the breaking point. Liam stood in front of the main control console, fingers hovering over the keypad, his brow furrowed in concentration. "We've got damage across the board," he said, looking up at the rest of the team. "We need to assess everything: power, water, the greenhouse, and the solar arrays. This isn't going to be easy." The once bustling colony now felt quiet, every sound amplified. The tension that had hung in the air before the storm had only deepened in its wake. They had made it through the worst of the storm, but the damage was evident. For the crew, the real test was yet to come. They had to pick up the pieces and rebuild what Mars had torn apart. One by one, the team members began their assessments. Ravi, the engineer, headed outside with Ariana to survey the solar arrays, which were now nothing more than a heap of bent and twisted panels, buried in Martian dust. They'd have to manually clear the sand and perform repairs in the harsh environment. "This is going to take days to fix," Ravi muttered, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cold. "We can't survive on backup power forever." Inside, Ava, the biologist, was busy inspecting the greenhouse. It had taken the brunt of the storm's fury. The walls were cracked, and several of the hydroponic systems had short-circuited. Thankfully, most of the plants had survived, though they were battered and fragile. "We're lucky we didn't lose everything," Ava said, her voice filled with both relief and frustration. "But it's going to take some work to get these systems back online." Meanwhile, Emily, the psychologist, focused on the mental well-being of the crew. After the grueling storm, the crew's emotional state was frayed. "We need a debrief," she said, addressing Liam. "Everyone's exhausted, and tempers are already starting to flare again. This isn't just about fixing the equipment. We need to repair the team's spirit." Liam nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. "Agreed. Let's take it one step at a time. But first, we have to get the essential systems running." The next few days were a blur of activity as the crew worked tirelessly to restore the systems. Ravi and Ariana spent hours digging out the solar arrays, while Ava and Emily tackled the repairs in the greenhouse. Every moment was a race against time. They had no idea how long the next storm would be, and they couldn't afford to wait until they were fully prepared. But the repairs weren't just about getting things up and running. Every broken piece, every damaged system, was a reminder of the fragility of their existence on Mars. It was easy to forget, in the hustle of planning and dreaming, that this was still a hostile, unforgiving planet. "We've got to find a way to make this more stable," Liam said one night as he surveyed the damage to the greenhouse. "We can't keep doing this, patching things up over and over. We need a plan to make everything more resilient." Ava, who had been working non-stop, looked up. "What do you have in mind?" Liam paused, his eyes scanning the room as if envisioning something beyond the present. "We need to build a more robust infrastructure. We need to use Martian resources to strengthen the habitat, the solar panels, and the greenhouse. We need to stop relying on backup power and start making this colony truly self-sufficient." It was a bold idea, one that would require significant innovation. But after the storm, it felt like the only viable option. They could no longer afford to treat Mars like a temporary stop. If they were going to stay, they had to make it work, for the long haul. The crew, despite their exhaustion, began brainstorming ways to use local resources to build more durable systems. They already knew how to extract water from the atmosphere, and they had experience using Martian regolith to build the outer walls of the habitat. But now, they needed to take those techniques further, applying them to every aspect of the colony. Ravi started experimenting with regolith-based solar panels that would be more resistant to the dust storms. Ariana and Ava worked together to design a Martian greenhouse made from locally sourced materials that would provide more protection against the elements. The idea was to use 3D printing to build modular structures that could be easily replaced or repaired if damaged, a smart, adaptable solution to the unpredictable nature of Mars. Even Emily, who had always focused on the psychological well-being of the crew, got involved. She suggested mindfulness techniques and group activities to help the team stay connected during their long, solitary hours of repair work. She was a firm believer that emotional resilience was just as important as physical strength in their survival. "We need to keep our minds strong as well as our bodies," Emily said. "We've been through a lot, and we'll go through more. But we have to stay united." The team had been through the worst of the storm, and now they were determined to rebuild, not just the systems, but the very foundation of their vision for the future of Mars. Weeks passed, and progress was slow but steady. The solar arrays were repaired, albeit at a reduced capacity. The greenhouse, though not yet fully functional, was starting to show signs of life. The crops were growing again, albeit more slowly than before. But it wasn't just the machines and plants that were recovering. The crew, too, was starting to heal. As they worked together, their bond deepened. The isolation and pressure had tested them, but it had also forged a new sense of unity. They weren't just a group of scientists and engineers anymore. They were a team, bound by their shared mission and their determination to make Mars a home. "We're getting there," Liam said one evening as the sun set over the red horizon, casting long shadows over the colony. "It's not perfect, but we're making it work. And that's all that matters." The days following the storm were a blur of activity. The crew had managed to patch up the most critical systems, but they knew they couldn't afford to rest for long. The dust storm had been a wake-up call, a brutal reminder that Mars didn't care about their plans or timelines. If they were going to build something sustainable, something that could thrive in the long term, they had to start thinking beyond survival. They had to think big. The team had already proven they could make it through the worst of Mars challenges, but now they faced a different kind of test: how to scale up their operations. How to take the fragile, makeshift systems they had used to scrape by and transform them into something more robust, more self-sustaining, and more resilient to the unforgiving environment. "We've survived," Liam said one evening, addressing the crew in the common area. "But now we need to build. We need to scale up everything we've learned so far, from energy generation to food production to water systems. We can't keep relying on Earth's supplies. Mars has everything we need, but we've got to figure out how to use it." The challenge sounded simple enough, but in truth, it would take everything they had, and then some. Ravi, always the engineer, took the lead on the energy front. "Our solar panels are better, but they're still fragile," he said, studying the latest reports on power consumption. "We can't depend on them for everything. We need more reliability, and we need it now." One solution they had been considering for some time was a geothermal energy system, which could tap into the internal heat of Mars to generate power. It would be a challenging project, requiring new infrastructure and extensive drilling, but it could be the key to solving their energy problem in the long term. "Geothermal is our best shot at being independent," Ravi continued. "But we need to get this right. If we mess it up, we could destroy our power grid before it even gets going." Ariana, who had been focused on resource extraction and habitat building, joined in. "If we're going to drill, we'll need a way to reinforce the geothermal wells. We don't have the luxury of trial and error out here. Everything we build needs to be able to withstand Mars' harsh conditions." The more they discussed, the more they realized that the task ahead of them was enormous. But the crew knew that this was their chance to innovate, to prove that human ingenuity could create a sustainable future on a world where every resource was precious. Water was always a priority, and with the failure of some of the previous systems during the storm, the team had learned how fragile their water infrastructure was. They couldn't afford another setback. "We've been relying on the atmospheric harvesters," Ariana said, scanning the reports on water production. "But if we want to scale up, we need a multi-tiered system, more than just harvesting the atmosphere. We need to tap into underground sources, maybe even create a closed-loop filtration system that recycles more efficiently." The idea of a closed-loop system had been discussed before, but had never been fully implemented. It would take considerable effort to design and build, But if they could create a system that captured and purified their waste, it could reduce their reliance on water imports from Earth, one of the most costly aspects of their mission. We need a complete overhaul, Ava, the biologist, said, tapping on her tablet as she looked at the water filtration data. A combination of atmospheric harvesting, underground reservoirs, and recycling. And we need to increase our efficiency by at least 30%. That's a tall order, Liam remarked. But we don't have any choice. Water is life. If we can't figure this out, we'll be back to square one. As they strategized, it became clear that creating a fully self-sustaining colony would require not just new technology, but new thinking. Every system had to be interconnected. Power, water, food. They couldn't afford to treat these things as isolated projects. They had to work together, in harmony, like the gears of a finely tuned machine. The greenhouse, though functional, had not yet reached its full potential. It was still fragile, still susceptible to the extreme weather fluctuations of Mars. Yet it was their only source of fresh food, and they needed it to expand. We need to diversify, Ava said, looking out at the rows of hydroponic crops. We've been growing mostly leafy greens and a few root vegetables. But if we want to make this work long-term, we need a more balanced food system. The solution was clear. Expand the greenhouse and begin growing a wider variety of crops. This meant integrating vertical farming techniques and potentially introducing aquaponics, a sustainable system that combined fish farming with plant cultivation. It would be complicated, but it could provide a more diverse food source that would be easier to maintain in the long term. The challenge, however, wasn't just the technical aspect. We need to make sure that everyone's on board, Emily said, watching the team work through their ideas. The mental strain of being here is already taking its toll. We need to keep morale high. As they worked together, it became increasingly clear that maintaining hope and motivation was just as important as the technical challenges they were solving. The team's resilience, their willingness to push through despite the odds, would be the true measure of their success. Over the next few weeks, the crew dove headfirst into the project. The geothermal system began taking shape as Ravi and Ariana worked together to design and build the deep drilling rig. They learned from their earlier mistakes, reinforcing the structure to withstand Mars' seismic activity. Meanwhile, Ava and Liam began implementing a more advanced closed-loop water filtration system, recycling everything from wastewater to the condensation produced by their own breathing. "This is it," Liam said, surveying their work one evening as the stars twinkled overhead. "We're building the future, not just for us, but for the generations that come after us." Their progress was slow, but it was steady. The challenges of scaling up their systems were enormous, but the team's collective determination was equally formidable. Each small victory, each new piece of technology they successfully integrated, was another step towards self-sufficiency. As the Martian sun began to dip behind the horizon one evening, casting long shadows over the crew's work, Liam took a moment to reflect on how far they had come. "We've done the impossible," he said. "We've made a colony on Mars, and we're going to make it thrive. Together." The Martian landscape had always been harsh, but lately, it felt even more unforgiving. The steady hum of machinery that had once brought a sense of order now echoed through the halls like a constant reminder of the delicate balance they were trying to maintain. Every decision the crew made seemed to carry the weight of the colony's future, and the pressure was starting to build in ways they hadn't fully anticipated. While they'd made great strides in scaling up their systems, there was a lingering sense of uncertainty. They had built a foundation for sustainability, but could they really make it work long-term? "We're reaching the breaking point," Liam said, pacing the control room as he reviewed the data on the latest energy output and water levels. "If the next dust storm hits, we'll be in serious trouble. Our new geothermal system is still untested, and we're pushing our power grid to the limit." His words hung in the air, a cold reality settling over the crew. They had made incredible progress, but there were still unknowns, and Mars was always just a little too unpredictable to be fully trusted. Ravi and Ariana had spent countless hours designing the geothermal energy system, and the drill was now in place. They drilled deep into the Martian crust, searching for the heat beneath. The new system would provide a much-needed backup to their solar arrays, a necessary safety net in case another storm wiped out their power source. But the risks were high. The geothermal wells had to be properly sealed and stabilized, or they could cause a disaster, something that was far too common when working with untested technologies on a planet as volatile as Mars. The pressure's on, Ravi said, standing in front of the control panel for the geothermal system. We've got to make sure everything's perfectly calibrated. A single mistake could destroy everything. Ariana, looking over his shoulder, nodded in agreement. We've never done anything like this before. There's no turning back if we mess this up. We need the power, though. It's our lifeline. The system had been tested with dry runs, but this was the moment of truth. Ravi was ready to initiate the process, but before he could press the button, he hesitated. Are we sure we're ready? He asked, his voice suddenly uncertain. Liam entered the room just as Ravi's hand hovered over the controls. There's never going to be a perfect moment, he said. We've done everything we can. It's time to take the risk. With a deep breath, Ravi activated the geothermal system. The machinery roared to life, and for a moment, the room was silent, every person holding their breath. Slowly, the power grid began to stabilize, drawing energy from the new system. But the moment of triumph was short-lived. A low rumble shook the ground beneath them. What was that? Ariana asked, her heart racing. Seismic activity, Ravi muttered, checking the data. It's minor, but it's there. We need to monitor this closely. It wasn't a disaster, but it was a warning. The geothermal system was a success, but the volatile nature of Mars was a constant reminder that even their best efforts could be undermined by forces beyond their control. Meanwhile, the water situation was also reaching a critical point. Their new closed-loop filtration system had been operational for a few weeks, and while it was working better than expected, the crew's water usage had increased dramatically due to the expanded greenhouse and the new aquaponics project. We're running low on water, Ava reported one morning. We've got to optimize the system, or we'll be in a crisis within the next 2 weeks. The problem was compounded by the fact that the atmospheric harvesters, which had been their primary source of water, were only producing a fraction of what they needed to meet the growing demand. While the new underground reservoirs were helping to fill in the gaps, they hadn't been able to extract as much water as they'd hoped. If the water levels drop too much, we'll have to cut back on food production, Liam said, looking at the reports. We can't afford to do that. The greenhouse is our only source of fresh food. Without it, we'll have to rely on rations from Earth, and that's not sustainable. The team gathered around, brainstorming ways to fix the issue. Emily, who had been observing the crew's growing tension, suggested they turn their attention to behavioral adjustments, using less water, improving filtration efficiency, and scaling back some of the less essential activities. We need to get creative, Emily said. Every drop counts. As Ava and Ravi worked on improving the water extraction systems, Ariana began testing new aquaponic designs that would require less water but yield a higher food output. The entire crew was under pressure, but they had learned over the last few months that adaptability was key to their survival. They would have to innovate, again, or face serious consequences. While the crew focused on the technical challenges, Emily was becoming increasingly concerned about the psychological toll the stress was taking on the team. The constant pressure to solve problem after problem, with no time for rest or reflection, was wearing on everyone. We need a break, Emily said, pulling Liam aside one evening. The constant pressure is starting to get to everyone. We can't keep pushing at this pace. Liam paused, looking out at the red horizon. I know, but there's no time to waste. Every moment counts. I get that, Emily replied. But if we break down emotionally, the whole thing falls apart. We need to give the team some space to breathe. Maybe take a day off. Do something different. Something that reminds us of what we're doing here. Liam's brow furrowed, but after a moment, he nodded. You're right. A little downtime won't hurt. We'll schedule a day of team-building activities. It's important for the long-term health of the mission. Days passed, and the tension remained palpable. Every small failure felt magnified. Every success seemed too fragile to celebrate. But then, just when it seemed like they couldn't handle any more pressure, something shifted. The geothermal system, though it had been tested under less than ideal conditions, had held up. The water filtration system, though still fragile, was starting to show improvement. The greenhouse continued to thrive, and the aquaponics system, while still in its early stages, was beginning to show promise. And perhaps most importantly, the crew began to realize something. They were not alone in this struggle. Each person's effort, each small victory, mattered. They weren't just surviving. They were building something bigger than themselves. Late one evening, after a long day of work, Liam stood at the observation window, staring out at the Martian landscape. The sun had set, casting long shadows over the dusty horizon. For the first time in weeks, he felt a flicker of hope. The systems were starting to stabilize. The greenhouse was expanding, and the crew was beginning to recover from the psychological strain. There were still challenges ahead, but for the first time in a long time, the team felt like they were on the right path. "We can do this," Liam said softly to himself. "We're making Mars work." The atmosphere at the colony was unusually quiet as the crew gathered in the common room. The weight of the past few months seemed to have caught up with everyone. The pressure to succeed was mounting, and though they had made strides in many areas, they knew deep down that they were living on the edge. A single misstep could send everything crashing down. Liam sat at the head of the table, his fingers tapping restlessly against the surface. Despite their recent progress, the situation on Mars felt more precarious than ever. They had made significant strides in becoming more self-sustaining, but there were still unknowns, and those unknowns had a way of becoming disasters in the blink of an eye. "We're about to hit a critical point," Liam said, breaking the silence. His voice was steady, but there was a sense of urgency behind it. "The dust storm season is coming. If we don't stabilize everything now, we won't survive the next few months." The team listened intently, each person feeling the weight of his words. The reality of living on Mars wasn't something that could be ignored. Every decision they made was a matter of life and death, not just for them, but for the future of humanity. "We're ready," Ravi said, though his words lacked the usual confidence. "The geothermal system is holding up. The water systems are working better than expected, though they're still not perfect. But we can't predict the dust storms. If we get another one like the last, we'll lose power. We've got to keep our solar panels in top condition, but that's a gamble. Even the geothermal system could go offline." Ariana, who had been deeply involved in the water systems, nodded. "We can't afford to lose the greenhouse either. If the dust storms block out the sun for weeks again, we won't have enough power to keep it running." Emily, ever the realist, added, "We're also reaching the limits of our food stores from Earth. The aquaponic system is still in its early stages. We're not in a position to survive long without a reliable source of food. Everything depends on the next few weeks. If we don't stabilize these systems now, we're not going to make it through." Liam's face grew even more serious. "The next storm is coming faster than we thought. We can't wait any longer. It's time to test our systems. Full scale." It started as a whisper in the data logs, a slight uptick in atmospheric pressure. The early warning systems in the colony's weather monitoring station started blinking yellow, but it was still too early to be certain. They had learned to be cautious in reading Martian weather patterns. Often, the storms changed course at the last minute, sparing them from the worst of the damage. "It could be nothing," Ariana said as she scanned the data, "but we'd better start preparing, just in case." They began their preparations immediately. The crew worked in a near-perfect rhythm, each member taking charge of their specific domain. Ravi and Ariana worked on reinforcing the geothermal and energy systems, while Ava and Emily checked the structural integrity of the greenhouse. Everyone had their role, and they executed it with a sense of urgency. But as the hours passed, the pressure continued to build. The weather patterns on Mars were notoriously unpredictable. They couldn't afford to take any chances. The warning finally came late in the evening. The storm was on its way. "This is it," Ravi said grimly. "It's bigger than we thought." The storm hit with a force that took them all by surprise. The winds howled with ferocity, rattling the colony's outer structures. The dust was so thick it felt like the planet itself was trying to swallow them whole. In the control room, Liam and Ravi worked together to stabilize the energy systems. "The geothermal is holding," Ravi said, watching the data feed. "But we're losing solar energy fast. The dust is thickening." "Keep the geothermal going," Liam ordered. "Make sure the backup power stays online. We need the greenhouse running." Ariana, monitoring the water systems, suddenly froze. "The filtration's slowing down. If we can't increase the flow rate, we'll run out of usable water within a few days." The storm was taking a toll on everything. The solar panels, though reinforced, weren't immune to the intense pressure of the storm. The dust storm blocked the sun's rays almost entirely, and the panels began to lose power. The crew was running out of time. As the storm raged outside, the crew gathered in the central hub. Their faces were drawn, but they couldn't afford to dwell on their fear. There was no room for panic. Every decision they made now would determine their future. "We're at 30% power," Ravi said, staring at the flashing screens in front of him. "The geothermal is still functioning, but it's barely enough to keep the life support systems going. We're going to need more power for the greenhouse, or we'll lose our crops." Ava's face was pale as she checked the greenhouse's temperature and humidity levels. "The temperature's dropping. We're losing heat. If we don't get the lights back on, we could lose everything." Liam's mind raced. The systems they had worked so hard to build were failing, just when they needed them the most. "Ariana," he called, his voice tight, "how long do we have before the water systems fail?" Ariana's eyes flicked over her readings. "We're at 48 hours, maybe less. If we don't stabilize the filtration, we'll run out of water before the storm clears. If the greenhouse loses power, we lose our crops. We can't survive on rations forever." The clock was ticking. At the height of the crisis, Liam made a difficult decision. He gathered the crew and told them what they needed to do. "We're going to have to sacrifice something," he said. "We can't save everything, but we can save the colony." After a tense pause, he continued, "We're going to reroute power from the greenhouse lights to the water filtration system. It's the only way to keep the water flowing long enough to ride out the storm." Ariana nodded reluctantly. "It's a gamble, but it might work. If we can keep the water running, we'll have time to repair the solar panels when the storm subsides. It won't be easy, but it's our best chance." The crew worked quickly, rerouting power and making adjustments where they could. The temperature inside the greenhouse began to drop, but the plants would have to survive with minimal light and heat for the next 48 hours. The water systems, however, held steady. They had bought themselves precious time. The storm lasted a full 48 hours. It felt like an eternity, each minute stretching out as the crew did everything they could to keep the systems online. The howling winds outside were deafening, and the constant pressure of survival weighed heavily on everyone. Yet, despite the challenges, they had weathered the storm. When the dust finally began to settle and the skies cleared, the crew took stock of the damage. The solar panels had suffered significant damage, but the geothermal system had been largely unaffected. The water filtration system was still operational, and though the greenhouse had taken a hit, the crops were mostly intact. "We made it," Ravi said quietly, looking at the system's readouts. "But barely." Liam stood silently for a moment, letting the gravity of the situation sink in. The crew had survived, again, but there was no denying that their success had been fragile. One wrong decision, one more storm, and it could all come crashing down. "We've proven we can adapt," Liam said, turning to the crew. "We're not out of the woods yet, but we've shown that we can handle whatever Mars throws at us. And that's worth something." The dust storm had passed, but the aftermath was stark. The Martian landscape was still shrouded in the red haze left behind by the storm, a reminder of how quickly things could change. The crew was exhausted, physically and mentally drained, but they were still standing, and in the end, that's what mattered. As they gathered in the central hub, the first rays of the Martian sun began to filter through the atmosphere, casting an eerie glow over the damaged solar panels. The power grid was still fragile, but it was holding on, and the geothermal system had continued to function without a hitch. The damage to the greenhouse was significant, but not catastrophic. The crops had survived, albeit with a lot of support from the backup systems. Liam stood before the team, his face drawn but resolute. The pressure they had faced over the past few days had been overwhelming, but now was the time to focus on what came next. "We've made it," Liam said, his voice carrying the weight of the past days. "We've come through the worst of it, but now we need to rebuild." The first task was obvious: restore the colony's energy systems. The solar panels had been severely damaged by the storm, and without a reliable power source, they couldn't continue their daily operations. Ravi and Ariana led the effort to repair and reinforce the panels, carefully checking for any structural weaknesses that might lead to future failures. The geothermal system, though still operational, needed more regular maintenance to ensure it could continue functioning at full capacity. "We're going to have to patch up the solar array first," Ravi said, pointing to the scorched solar panels that were barely holding together. "But with some work, we can get them back online. It'll be close, but I think we can do it." Ariana nodded, her hands steady as she reviewed the plan. "We'll need to bring the backup generators online in the meantime. If we can't get the solar power up soon, we'll have to rely on geothermal and emergency reserves." While the engineers worked tirelessly on restoring the energy grid, Ava and Emily turned their attention to the greenhouse. The temperature had dropped too low during the storm, and while many crops had managed to survive, some were too far gone to recover. The aquaponics system, which had been designed as a backup food source, had been nearly destroyed by the loss of power, and now they needed to rebuild it from scratch. "The crops are holding on, but we need to reset the environment to keep them alive," Ava said, surveying the rows of plants that were still growing but showing signs of stress. "Let's focus on the highest yield plants," Emily replied, pulling out a tablet and making notes. "We need to maximize every inch of space, and we'll have to fix the aquaponics system. It's our last line of defense." The team worked in shifts, each person pushing through their exhaustion to repair what had been damaged. They all knew that if they didn't get their systems back to full capacity, they would be in danger of running out of essential supplies: water, food, energy. All of it was interconnected, and failure in one area could bring down the whole operation. But as the days wore on, the situation slowly improved. The solar panels began to come back online, one by one. The geothermal system held steady. The greenhouse temperature stabilized, and the crops began to show signs of recovery. The aquaponics system, though in need of major repairs, was functional again, providing them with a steady stream of fresh fish and vegetables. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to give them hope. As the crew worked together to rebuild, Liam found himself reflecting on the past year. The journey they had taken from Earth had been fraught with challenges, but it had also been a profound journey of growth, both for the team and for humanity. They weren't just surviving on Mars, they were learning how to live there. And that was the most important lesson they could take back with them. "We've learned so much," Liam said one evening as the crew gathered around for their debriefing. "We've learned how to adapt, how to work with the systems that are available to us. And we've learned that nothing is guaranteed here." Emily, who had always been the team's emotional anchor, smiled. "We've also learned that we're stronger than we thought. Every time we hit a wall, we found a way to break through. That's what got us through the worst of it." Ravi nodded, looking out the window at the red horizon. "Mars is a harsh place, but it's also a place where you have to be resourceful. If you're not, you won't survive. But if you are, you can build something that lasts." Ariana, who had been working tirelessly on the geothermal system, added, "It's all about sustainability, not just in terms of energy or food, but in how we take care of each other, how we support each other through the hard times." Liam looked around at his crew. Despite everything they had been through, the failures, the doubts, the moments of fear, they had made it through together. They were not just a team, they were a family, and they had proven, against all odds, that human resilience could overcome even the harshest conditions. "We've built something here," Liam said, his voice filled with pride. "And it's just the beginning." The days following the storm were spent in recovery mode, but also in anticipation. They had managed to repair and reinforce their systems, and they had learned valuable lessons about how to survive in Mars' unpredictable environment. But there was still much work to be done. The next step for the crew was to scale up their efforts. They had proven that they could survive, but now they needed to ensure they could thrive. The greenhouse needed expansion, the aquaponics system needed optimization, and they needed to develop new technologies to address the resource limitations they had faced during the storm. Liam had already begun formulating a new plan, a long-term vision for the colony. It wasn't just about surviving on Mars anymore. It was about growing and adapting in a way that would ensure their place on the planet. They would need to find new ways to harness the planet's resources, new ways to collaborate with Earth, and most importantly, new ways to adapt to the unforgiving environment. "The future is still uncertain," Liam said to the team in their final meeting of the month. "But we're no longer at the mercy of the unknown. We've learned to live here. We've learned to adapt, and now we'll build." As Liam stood alone in the observation room, Looking out at the vast Martian landscape, he felt a quiet sense of pride. They had come so far, from the first landing to this moment of quiet resilience. They had faced every challenge and emerged stronger. But beyond the technical challenges, beyond the systems they had built, what mattered most was the deep sense of purpose that bound them together. Mars was still a harsh, unforgiving place. But the team had proved that humanity could thrive there. The mistakes, the struggles, and the victories had all led them to this point. A point where they no longer saw Mars as a threat, but as a new home. "We're not just surviving," Liam whispered to himself. "We're creating a new beginning." The Martian horizon stretched before him, vast and red, and for the first time, it felt full of possibility. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?